Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались з кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великої страни.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Їх доводи всяке озброєння різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів, робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там пивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар.
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 Yes.
The lead Spring Army sends its regards.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 1093 of the War News stream. And today we have very big news that Russia is getting absolutely hammered inside of Donetsk right now, and it's not going good for them. We're also hearing that Europe's preparing to seize Russian assets to fund Ukraine, and also Israel's launching attacks after a terror attack in apparently somewhere in Israel. I think it's Tel Aviv. I forgot the place though right at the last minute, but it's good to see you all once again.
And of course, we're going to be covering the past 24 hours of news from around the world. As we've been able to hear today, the Ukrainian armed forces have continued the third day of successful counterattacks along the entirety of the front line within Donetsk. We have been able to see the Ukrainian armed forces have reclaimed ground in Toretsk and the battlefield of Pokrovsk as of today, and it appears that the Russian Federation's armed forces within the area are entirely on the defensive as the Ukrainian army continues to steamroll its way further on, taking more villages that were crucial parts of the Russian main defensive line, as it seems as though the Russians are now having to fall back and regroup at villages nearly a mile or a mile and a half behind where they were earlier today. We have also been able to hear significant news at the exact same time that the Ukrainian armed forces are continuing their actions inside of the Kursk Oblast, and it does appear that at this time the Russian Federation is not able to uproot Ukrainian forces from their positions inside of Kursk, neither are the Ukrainians able to advance. However, it is incredibly clear at this point that the Ukrainians will be holding on to their Kursk holdings well into the future. We've also been able to hear at the exact same time that there has been a significant attack inside of the city of Tel Aviv by an unknown group, nevertheless setting off bus bombs in the center of Tel Aviv and then running rampant through the city. This is coming at the exact same time as the Prime Minister of Israel has declared that they'll be conducting military action on the Syrian-Lebanese border and in the West Bank against Iranian proxy forces that have been operating in both of those areas. We have been able to hear reports very clearly recently that there are airstrikes that are currently being conducted along the Lebanese-Syrian border by the Israeli Air Force, although exact information and details about the Israeli operations in the West Bank have not been produced yet. But we were able to hear the official statement by the Israeli government, which is confirming that Israeli armed action within the West Bank is going to be beginning effective immediately. Meanwhile, We've also been able to hear some additional news that the captain of the Harry S. Truman has been dismissed from their position, or largely removed from their position as captain of the aircraft carrier after its collision with a bulk tanker, which was seen somewhere around the area of Port Said several days ago. We've also been able to get more information as well about the current diplomatic situation inside of Europe, as we have been able to hear that the French Republic and the president of France has stated that they believe that right now the statements from the United States are some sort of a convoluted diplomatic scheme to try and get the Russians to the negotiating table, although that's yet to be seen at the moment, and the statements on the face of it aren't really the best. We've also been able to hear, however, that the Europeans are beginning to rally and attempt to find a way to continue to finance the Ukraine war with or without the United States, as the Polish Prime Minister, Donald Tusk, has stated that they want to step up support by liquidating frozen Russian funds and then dedicating those to Ukrainian military aid, using the money that would be liquidated to be able to purchase weapons and produce them inside of European countries, and then produce the end product, the actual weapons themselves, on into Ukraine for the Ukrainian armed forces to use against the Russian Federation in the war effort. We have loads and loads of news today. As a matter of fact, these are just a small part of the amount of news that we have to cover, but I will be saying that there are a couple of things that we have at this moment that we will not be talking about tonight, and I do want to clarify this because as far as our news coverage goes, we always want to make sure that we have very factual and clear statements or video and picture evidence to corroborate our news, so there are a couple of major stories that some of y'all may be expecting to hear that will not be mentioned tonight because of a lack of clear information. For one, we have been able to hear that the Ukrainians did state today that the United States had now stopped all weapon purchases by Ukraine of American military equipment. We are not entirely sure if that is true or not at this moment, because while a Ukrainian minister did come out and make that statement, another Ukrainian minister of a nearly similar position inside the Ukrainian government then came out and stated that that was not true and that the Ukrainians are still able to purchase weapons and equipment from the United States of America, meaning that the story isn't really clear enough to get you all a clear picture of what's going on in that metric right now. Also, another one that we are not really going to be touching on too much today, considering that we touched on it heavily yesterday, was the statements in between Russia and the United States, as they largely it was almost the same rhetoric as yesterday, so there's really no reason in beating the dead horse. The analysis would still be the same. But moving on from
basically the only thing that really changed since yesterday is it sounds like the U.S. is revisiting the proposed mineral deal. They're once again reproposing a new one to Zelenskyy in the hopes of getting him to sign it. But it sounds like they're trying to push it through and pressure him once again. So it sounds like it's not likely to actually be signed by Zelenskyy, but there's no telling. Maybe he'll go through with it this time, but there's just no way to know.
We don't really know, of course, and that's a fairly clear thing to say, is that on the diplomatic level, it doesn't really appear that much has changed to this point. It's the exact same situation as yesterday, but we will be going over the rest of the news outside of those two stories that we do have today, because a lot is still developing, especially out there on the Ukrainian front lines, and wildly enough, in Ukraine's favor. Moving on down into the area of Ukraine, we have been able to see a large amount of battlefield developments again today. As a matter of fact, it actually is a pretty wild thing to see at this moment that the Ukrainian armed forces are continuing to push the Russians back from the city of Pokrovsk. The offensive, or the counterattack, largely, which is what it should be framed as, began by the Ukrainians about 3 days ago, and we were able to see the Ukrainian armed forces were able to take the town of Kotline and Pischane within the first day. On the second day, we were able to hear the Ukrainian armed forces were now advancing into the town of Zelenskyy, and then finally, we were also able to hear, as of today, that the Ukrainians have retaken the largest village so far of the counterattack, the city of, well, more so the village of Lysivka, which is just south of Pokrovsk. This town is a somewhat significant one, as a matter of fact, because it actually has a pretty wide area of coverage for the large part for a town. While this doesn't really seem like that big of a thing, this actually is a fairly big thing when we're speaking on the strategic level of what the Battle of Pokrovsk is looking like. Right now, the battle is largely being fought over a plain. There are practically no slag heaps, for that matter. There are some, but they're incredibly limited in number in this area of Donetsk to be able to dominate any kind of high ground to direct fire from or anything along those lines. And also, the entire area is a massive rolling plain around the entirety of Pokrovsk. This means that within this area, it is far more important to control actual built-up structures than other places in Ukraine where terrain actually would have a larger playing factor. Considering that the terrain is almost perfectly flat in this area, any kind of a built-up structure that breaks line of sight with the enemy is an incredibly important kind of a thing to have control over. And not only that, For the Ukrainians, built-up structures are good defensive elements, and for the Russian Federation, they are good offensive staging areas, and now at this point, they are fairly decent defensive elements for the Russian Federation as well. This means that every single village within this open plain near to Pokrovsk is an incredibly crucial and vital sort of a area to control, because it is the life and death of an offensive or a defensive in this area is how quickly you can move forward and take the next village and stage a defensive and then a future offensive from that direction. The Ukrainians have had a lot of success recently with dealing with these issues because right now the Ukrainians are in the control of Kotline near to the railway berm, which you can see right here, and they're also in control of Pischane as well. This means that at this point, near to the southern front of Pokrovsk, the Russian forces are in control of Vovkove and Shevchenko, which aren't really incredibly significant. Well, Shevchenko actually is a somewhat significant holding, but Vovkove is largely isolated and is an incredibly small farming village, meaning that there really isn't a lot of built-up structures, and the Russians are largely relying on the tree cover that surrounds the town of Vovkove at this point to be able to stage defensives from the Ukrainian forces that are now able to fire on them from the tree line at Kotline or from the village of Pischane. However, the Russian position at Shevchenko appears to be a little bit stronger at this point, as the Russians still have a somewhat clear connection to the rear line, although that is starting to be threatened by the Ukrainian action today, and Shevchenko may end up becoming a considerable liability here in the future for the Russian armed forces, because as of today, the Ukrainians somehow, I do have to put this out there because I was actually fairly shocked by this one, somehow charged across a mile and a half of open fields from the town of Pokrovsk and actually retook the entire village of Lysivka as of today. We were able to hear this statement from the armed forces of Ukraine, and we did see that all battle maps did adjust to show that the Ukrainians have now retaken the town of Lysivka. One second, let me make sure I get this correct. I want to make sure that I get the name correct. Lysivka. Very sorry about that, everyone. For some reason, I had like a mental lapse of the memory of that name of that village, but nevertheless, the Ukrainians...
I had that too at the very beginning, like a senior moment. We shouldn't be having senior moments at our age. That's not a good sign.
Look, Jack, it happens.
It's in early. Let me president know.
Pokrovsk is a wasteland of prairies and wheat. There is something like that. But nevertheless, the Ukrainians were able to retake Lysivka today and drive the Russians into the fields south of Lysivka. This is a fairly important deal because at this point, the next defensive element that the Russians have to work off of is either the town of Soledove or Novohradivka. Both of these are in much better defensive positions than really the rest of the Russian front, spanning west of the town of Soledove, because right now with the Ukrainians controlling Lysivka, this means that the Russian positions anywhere along the E50 highway or west of the E50 highway, including Shevchenko, may be in jeopardy of being encircled by Ukrainian push that may drive further south from Lysivka or directly onto Dachinske, where we can see that the Russians are uprooted from their control of the E50 highway, and there really is no way to move in any kind of vehicular support whatsoever, although that may not be that big of an issue, because we are already hearing that the Russian Federation isn't really able to leverage any vehicular support or equipment beyond Soledove. So the Ukrainian maneuvers may not really have that much of an effect on the Russian defensive positions within this area, as they may largely be relying on foot support and foot supplies for the large part at this point, and not really any sort of vehicular or armored support based off the battlefield assessments given by the Russians earlier. Nevertheless, though, we were also able to see a little bit of additional clips showing the 25th Airborne continuing to hit Russians within this area, also with trap beats playing in the background. And we see here a Russian wandering around the field, and we now see a bomblet landing near the road, and this guy appears to be unfazed, and he's still walking. And we can see another drone come in, and it doesn't appear that that's the case anymore. But that's the...
It just like smacked him, really. Didn't even do anything except just go by and whack him on the shoulder.
They call that a kinetic impact. Like, it is not what you think. But moving on from that and into our next clip, we also got to see a Ukrainian Leopard also slamming a Russian vehicle within the area of Pokrovsk. I'm not going to lie, this was one of the crazier clips I've seen. The Russian tank was actually abandoned and is somewhere a little bit further west, actually east of Pokrovsk. It's more so towards the area of Vuhledar. But nevertheless, this was a wild clip because I've never seen a Russian tank get hit by a main battle tank and immediately turn into kindling. But here's the clip. And when you see the Leopard fire, hit the tank, and it literally turns into a Roman candle instantly. That was actually one hell of a shot right there, because I have seen Leopards hit Russian main battle tanks before. We've seen that a lot over the course of the war, but it rarely ever produces a direct ammo detonation. Usually it hits, sparks go flying, and the tank sits there for a little bit smoldering. Usually the crew has time to actually bail out if they're still alive, and then the tank will start to go up in flames. I've never seen a hit where it appears that it actually ammo racked the tank instantaneously and the ammo went up in one go like it did right there. That actually is pretty impressive as far as the shot counts. But moving on from that, and out of that little clip right there, we have also been able to see an additional clip of a Ukrainian Bradley firing on the Russians as well during the counterattacks that are going on right now today. And we were able to see that Bradley laying down fire with a 25mm Bushmaster onto the village, which is largely controlled by the Russian forces at this point.
It looks like those Bradleys are still like the Ukrainians' like favored vehicle at this point for launching these type of assaults. It looks like they're still being used quite heavily.
The Bradley is an incredibly good vehicle. I mean, it's just an amazing infantry fighting vehicle. It's just well-made, well-rounded, and no matter how much slander that movie Pentagon Wars or the book Pentagon Wars put out about the Bradley, the proof is in the pudding. The Bradley's one of the best infantry fighting vehicles out there in the world right now, without a doubt. I would say the only thing that really gives the Bradley a run for its money is probably the Stridsforden 9040s or the Stridsforden 90 series from Sweden. That's an incredibly good infantry fighting vehicle from what we've seen, and the Ukrainians like to use it to great effect. So it appears to be the only thing comparable to the Bradley, but still, the Bradley is absolutely incredible.
And let's see, I was just checking here because I was curious. I'm like, how many Bradleys does Ukraine actually have? It looks like the U.S. has supplied over 300 Bradleys over the course of the last year or so. So it's quite a few they've got.
Also, really quickly, just to rewind this, I hate that this happened, Matthew, but right when you were talking, a Russian drone actually tried to hit the rear of the Bradley. We can see that right here in a second. It gets hit.
Oh.
And that looks like a pretty serious hit. We can see one Ukrainian soldier stumble right here, but he then gets up and moves out of the way. The rear loading door closes. We can see the rest of the Ukrainian dismounted infantry now getting behind the Bradley. And we now see them moving on forward. The Bradley, crazily enough, completely unscathed. Now after the Bradley has departed the area, it's now leaving at a higher speed, leaving the Ukrainian infantry squad to continue the fight as it tries to evacuate the battlefield and get out to be able to assess the damage and also be able to get to safety. Infantry fighting vehicles, while incredibly good, and the Bradley is certainly no exception, are not completely invincible. And for this reason, you largely want to make sure that once the infantry is dropped off, the Bradley provides a considerable amount of fire support, but then leaves as quickly as possible, so that way the vehicle is not put into jeopardy the entire time.
One thing's for sure, though, the Bradley can definitely take a tick or a beating and keep on ticking because the Russians can't. Like, when they get hit like that, they're pretty much finished.
Yeah, I mean, it is crazy to see how well a Bradley survives compared to a BMP, but it really is due to the superior design and really the over-engineering of the Bradley compared to any of their Russian counterparts. For example, the most common BMPs that we see are largely the BMP-1 and BMP-2 series armored personnel carriers being used by the Russians and the Ukrainians. The BMP-2, qualitatively, is far better than the BMP-1 in terms of usability, but they both operate off of the same hull. The real difference that lies in between the BMP-1 and the BMP-2 is the turret layout and configuration, which the BMP-1 was absolutely horrendous. These are actually used widely by both sides, even still to this day. Both the Russians and the Ukrainians use them, but there are some considerable drawbacks to the BMP-1 as compared to the BMP-2. But we're going to get to the failures of both of them here in a moment. But the BMP-1 and the BMP-2 have a crew of 3. On the BMP-2, there's the driver, and then there's also the commander and the gunner inside the turret. In the BMP-1, the driver is in the foremost hatch of the APC, which you can see right there on the BMP-2 clearly, but the commander is in the hatch right behind him inside of the hull. This means that the gunner is completely separated, as far as command is concerned, from the commander, and the commander actually has to turn around and issue fire orders and corrections to the gunner of the BMP-1, and also to the position of the commander's hatch on the original BMP-1 series armored personnel carriers. The orders and commands that the commander was able to give was incredibly poor, because the commander only has a front-facing facing periscope on the BMP-1 and the BMP-2. So this means, to explain this in better sense, this is practically leaving the commander completely blind, because if anything's going on to the left, right, or rear of the vehicle, the commander simply cannot see it because he just doesn't have a field of view that allows that. So that means that as far as the BMP-1 was concerned in actual practice, its efficiency is incredibly poor. You pretty much have to know what you're shooting at before you even go into battle with the BMP-1. The BMP-2 tried to fix those issues by enlarging the turret, and not only that, removing the I believe it's a 76mm recoilless gun, actually it's a 73mm recoilless gun, from the one-man turret, and then they added on a 2A42 30mm autocannon onto the turret instead. This, in theory, was supposed to improve the firepower mass that was able to be delivered, and also help with suppressing enemy infantry, at least according to Soviet fighting doctrine, which would have been a lot more efficient for the armored personnel carriers of the later Soviet era. However, the commander was also moved, well, really the hull of the BMP-2 took no changes whatsoever from its BMP-1 counterpart, except for the enlargement of the turret well, and also the difference in the turret, but the commander's hatch and the commander's position still remained in the BMP-2, it's just that now it's considered to be an infantry position for mounted infantry that are riding inside the vehicle. The commander is now inside of the turret along with the gunner. Issue is that the field of view still isn't incredibly good in the BMP-2. It is much better than the BMP-1. And also, another interesting thing that some of y'all may not know is that the BMP-1's gun has no stabilizer. That means that the BMP-1 has to stop, and the gunner actually has to align the gun with the target, sight it in, and then adjust for distance, and then fire, meaning that this thing has very little response time in an actual engagement kind of a scenario, or it really can't conduct suppressing fire while it's advancing to dismount its troops inside the armored personnel carrier. The BMP-2 actually does have a gun stabilizer, so technically this thing actually can provide fire support while moving into position, or really suppressing fire, to move into position to dismount the infantry. Still, both of these have considerable problems. For one, the armor on both of them is wildly thin. If you thought the armor on an M113 was thin, you haven't even heard of the armor on the BMP series. The BMP series has such light armor that a 7.62x39 round from an AKM can punch clean through the armor. Like, no joke, you can actually knock out the crew one by one by picking the exact spots in the turret and the hull where they would be, and just firing into that general direction, and you can actually end up taking out the entire crew that way. So even a medium machine gun would make quick work of a BMP from a side angle, or even a front angle for the large part, when directed straight at the driver, who really has no protection at all inside of the hull. Another thing that's also a major issue is that to the rear of the BMP, back here behind the turret, which is where the infantry are, that is actually a giant fuel tank. There's a giant fuel tank that divides the infantry compartment straight down the middle, so if you fire a 50 BMG into that area and it punches through the first armor, not only that, it will punch into the fuel tanks and most likely set the fuel on fire, especially if you're using an incendiary tracer round. So the entire infantry compartment can go up in blazes from a couple of hits with a 50 BMG. Another issue with the BMP is that the engine is in the front of the vehicle. That's actually not that bad for the large part, because the Bradley also has the engine forward placed. The issue is, however, is that there is absolutely no armor protection on a BMP. So when you shoot at the engine block, you can actually cause some pretty decent damage, because most rounds will go through the armor straight into the engine block, and you can start causing all kinds of considerable engine damage to the BMP, largely rendering it unusable once it comes under fire. Because also another thing I forgot to tell y'all is that there is no redundant failsafe. If the engine goes out in a BMP, everything goes down. Like, the turret's hydraulic systems are no longer operational, the gun stabilizer is off, all targeting systems, if there are any, are completely shut off at that point. The driver obviously has no control of the vehicle at this point, it's completely immobilized, and also, everything else in the vehicle that works on hydraulic or electrical power is completely disabled at that point once the engine goes out. That is completely different from the M3 Bradley, which has been provided to the Ukrainians by the United States. The M3 Bradley fixes all of those issues that would be seen in, say, your normal kind of BMP series that's used by the Russians and the Ukrainians. The Bradley has an anti-tank ability built into each one. It has a tow launcher mounted to the left side of the turret. It carries 2 tow missiles. You can load any kind of tow missile that you want in it. So a tow 1, an ITOW, a tow 2, or a tow 2B. Any of those can be loaded. They are all universal. They all fit within the same tow launcher. It also has the 25mm Bushmaster. It has an incredibly high visibility and field of view for the commander, allowing the commander to actually make on-the-spot decisions and be able to see the entirety of his surrounding environment, which makes it far easier for the Bradley to be much more responsive in tighter fixes or situations where the battlefield could be changing rapidly around the IFV. Not only that, but it has an increased, it has a much higher armor rating than the BMP. The armor is thicker on all sides of the Bradley, meaning that a heavy machine gun would not go through, and in most instances that we've seen in the Ukraine war so far, even RPG rounds, like RPG 7s, can easily be shrugged off by a Bradley in most scenarios. There are a couple of hits that will disable the Bradley on the first hit, but those very rarely occur. A hit where an RPG
and also, and also, by the way, like the design on the Bradley is just so much better than all the other designs we just looked at, the Soviet designs. This thing just looks like 10 times better. And also, I see some people that said that they drove Bradleys in the Army. They're talking about how good the heater is. I've heard stories about the heater, like being like those school bus heaters that like will burn your leg off if you're too close to it. So yeah, those heaters are apparently a menace from what I've heard, but they're helpful though when you're in freezing temperatures, obviously.
But these Bradleys are absolutely incredible. There are a lot of infantry fighting vehicles that are made to Bradley standards. One that is really an unsung kind of a hero is the Warrior tracked armored fighting vehicle, or the infantry fighting vehicle of the British Army, which is fairly similar actually in design concept to the Bradley, but different in some ways. But nevertheless, I won't bring y'all through every single infantry fighting vehicle that's currently in NATO service at this point. But nevertheless, the Bradley is an amazing infantry fighting vehicle. It's a serious upgrade compared to their counterparts that are used by the Ukrainians or the Russians, and these things find themselves put to great use by the Ukrainians on the battlefield. Truly a godsend for the large part for a lot of the Ukrainian armed forces that get to use these kinds of vehicles while I sit there and have indigestion because I ate that patty melt right before the stream, which I shouldn't have done, but I had to because I knew I was going to be starving in the middle of the stream. But moving on from that, we have been able to hear of even more things going on outside of the Pokrovsk battlefield and that giant talk that we had about the infantry fighting vehicles and their survivability. But moving on out of that little area, Pokrovsk, and down into Israel, we've actually been able to hear that currently there has been a major attack that has occurred in Tel Aviv that used bus-based bombs to be able to conduct an act of terror inside the city of Tel Aviv. We were able to see some details of this at the moment, but really quickly before we get into this, I actually realized that I just stepped way ahead because we actually asked all of y'all a bit of a question, a big question, as a matter of fact, about the Ukrainian counterattacks that are going on in Donetsk right now. As Ukraine remains funded, will Russia keep getting pushed back on the front lines? And it appears that everyone, an overwhelming majority, is saying yes, Ukraine will maintain momentum. A small group of people are saying that Ukraine will return to the stalemate, and others are saying that Ukraine funding is going to end probably soon, and some others are unsure and undecided. But Matthew, what are people thinking about it, and what are you thinking about it as well?
All right. So one more time, just to reiterate, if Ukraine remains funded, that is the big thing, the big assumption there. The big question is, will Russia keep getting pushed back on the front lines? So 74%, the overwhelming majority, said yes, Ukraine will maintain their forward line momentum, while 12% said no, Ukraine will return to a stalemate, and 7% said Ukraine funding is probably going to end, and that's probably not even an accurate assumption in the question. So I would say this. I would say that it sounds like Ukraine's going to remain funded one way or another. If Europe's doing it, then good for them. And if the USA stays in it, then obviously that's what we should be doing anyway. So either way you go, Ukraine will remain funded to keep fighting against Russia. So I imagine that probably will not be an issue in the end. It's just a question of who's going to do it. Now, on the frontline situation, I will say that as long as it keeps flowing, there's no interruption to the equipment and also the aid going to Ukraine, then there's no reason they should lose momentum whatsoever. In fact, they should continue to gain momentum as they keep pushing the Russians back. And they keep being funded all the way. So I'm with the overwhelming majority. I think they're going to keep on pushing, and that's going to put Russia even in a worse position than they're currently in right now. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to believe that the Ukrainians will be able to maintain the momentum as long as material support remains at a high level. I actually would say, for the large part, that even if the United States stops supporting Ukraine, I think at this point, the Europeans have started to arm themselves so well behind the scenes that they will be able to carry the momentum and pretty much keep the Ukrainians rolling at least well into the future based off of the current rates of supplies that are coming out of Europe and are going to be sent to Ukraine. For example, really quickly to let all of y'all know this, the European Union has stated that they are most likely going to be providing another 1.5 million shells to Ukraine here in the near future, which means that based off of that one supply shipment alone, the Ukrainians will be able to keep up a consistent rate for an entire year of 4,109 shells fired per day from that one ammunition allotment alone. And that's not just that. The fact that the Germans are now producing, I believe, around, let me see here, I believe it was around 750,000 shells. I forgot what the exact number was. I'm trying to think of it. I think it was something like 75,000 shells a month, which would end up being nearly several hundred thousand shells per year. And that's just the Rheinmetall company. They would be able to provide the Ukrainians with a large amount of artillery to just keep their current existing equipment running. Of course, I also think that they'd probably be able to provide a decent amount of support as well in terms of replacements for losses. Not only that, to help the Ukrainian armed forces continue to grow in ability and firepower. I think that that is a pretty decent likelihood, in my opinion as well. I really have to say that no matter what, I think the future would be pretty certain for Ukraine that with how Europe is starting to move at this point, which we'll be getting to here in a minute in the show, that they actually would be in a fairly decent spot. I think they would be able to keep the war going for a pretty good while and be able to do a little bit of a decent number over on the Russians on the battlefield. Of course, I'm not saying that they're going to be racing to Donetsk or Luhansk anytime soon. I still think that's largely out of the picture. But they would be able to continue to put the Russians on the back foot and keep them on the defensive, which would stop the Russian Federation from claiming any additional territory that they do not have yet at this moment. So with that, I hope that does address that incredibly well. Also, by the way, got to take a moment to thank everyone who's been massively supporting the channel tonight. There's been so many massive amounts of support that have come through. I got to thank everyone for that. We will be getting to hopefully a few of those here in a little bit, but we're going to get y'all some more news in the meantime. But a huge thanks to all of y'all, because y'all are helping this channel to keep on running day in and day out and continue to get y'all the news, which we're entirely honored and incredibly appreciative to know that y'all are the folks, well, we are the folks that y'all trust on delivering the news every single day. So a huge thanks to everyone so far. But moving on from that and down into Tel Aviv, we have been able to see that some sort of a major attack occurred inside of Tel Aviv, or some bus-based bombs were detonated. I unfortunately don't have a great deal of detail about this. The best detail that I was able to ascertain, or at least the details that are clear at this point, is that several buses within the city of Tel Aviv exploded, apparently having bombs on board, and there were some unknown men that started to run around and possibly try and cause havoc throughout the city of Tel Aviv. But beyond that, I don't really have an incredibly large amount of details about this attack yet at this moment. But we do have a couple of clips showing the buses, one of the buses burning inside of a Tel Aviv parking lot somewhere within downtown Tel Aviv. And here's the clip. We can see that Israeli police have arrived, and it appears that firefighters are also arriving on the scene. And I believe that the bomb exploded on an articulated bus, and we can see that the entire bus is currently in flames after the explosion.
That's terrible. I had heard that whoever set these things up on the buses, they had set them up with some type of remote igniter or something like that, and apparently a lot of them failed to detonate, at least on the designated time they were scheduled to detonate. So it sounded like some really, really bad malfunctions with whatever this was who set this.
Interesting. I wonder what kind of fuses they were using, because for those of y'all who may know a little bit about fuses, there's many different kinds of fuses that can be used on these kinds of explosives. There are acid-based fuses where you actually break a glass vial and the acid begins to burn away at a detonator, and once the detonator is completely burned away, a process begins which detonates the bomb. There's also an electronically activated bomb. There's all kinds of different ways that fuses work. I don't really know what kind of fuses would be used in this particular scenario, but it does nevertheless sound that it was one with a high failure rate. So it may have been an incredibly crude kind of an acid-based fuse, and maybe the acid actually didn't burn all the way through the fuses, and for that reason, a lot of the explosives did not detonate, which sounds to be incredibly fortunate for sure.
So it looks like we're told here, based on our current intel, that it looks like there were 3 empty parked buses that exploded in the city of Bat Yam, and that was one of them we just saw there in the video. And there were an additional 2 buses found with explosive devices. They apparently all had timers on them, which malfunctioned, except for the one you saw there in the video. So some type of timer detonation device apparently was attached to all of them, and they apparently weren't wired up very good because they didn't go off when they were supposed to.
Man, you gotta always give it to the Iranian proxies. They always act like it's the Ringling Brothers Circus and they're trying to put on a good show. I don't know how they always do that, but somehow, every single time, their attacks are the worst that have ever been conducted. Like, it's almost like they have no planning at all put into anything. Even when it looks like it's gone incredibly well, there's a lot of things that would usually go incredibly wrong. Like, for example, on October 7th, there were some times, I don't even know how in the world they did it, they would drive right past everything into a place like Ashdod, and then they get greased by the police. Like, I don't even know how in the world you do that, but they would, and I would just be like, how can you plan that poorly? Like, let's just drive on a motorcycle straight down the motorway into Ashdod and expect to get by with it. It's like, no, that's not going to work. It's like that just never would work anywhere in the world. But while that is going on, we were able to hear that the Prime Minister of Israel has confirmed that they will be conducting military operations inside of the West Bank. And not only that, we were able to get confirmations today that there were Israeli airstrikes along the Lebanon-Syria border, according to local reports. We have not been able to get any video or picture evidence yet at this time of the Israeli airstrikes that have been occurring on the Lebanese-Syrian border, but we would be assuming that they are currently going on at this time. We do not know why, because from what we generally understand, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has not really been able to supply or support Hezbollah forces for a decent while since the Syrian interim government took control, and we really have no reason to believe that that situation would have changed at this point. So we're a little bit interested into why that is going on at this time. It may be that they're trying to attack and destroy Hezbollah forces that are on the Lebanese side of the Lebanese-Syrian border, but still the actual reason for these airstrikes is a bit of a mystery according to the information that we've been able to collect for an incredibly long time over the course of running this channel during the entire situation since October 7th, really for an entirety of a year and a half at this point. I really have no reason why those airstrikes are going on, and I don't think there's really been a justification that's been given to the public so far. But another thing that we've been able to hear as well out of the Middle East is that the captain of the Harry S. Truman has been dismissed from their position. It was stated that the U.S. Navy has fired the commander of the USS Harry S. Truman due to the fact that it had a collision in the middle of the sea near to Port Said with a bulk carrier. And it appears that the damage was underplayed a little bit, but there was a significant amount of damage to the upper structure of the hull near to one of the rear one second, what in the world's name? But I don't know why I'm doing this tonight. Aircraft elevators, or the hangar elevators that are on the exterior side of the vessel. There was a decent amount of damage that we were able to see in that area, and I would assume, although this is an assumption, and I want to make that somewhat clear that this is 100% assumption, that the dismissal of the captain must be showing that there was some fault on the behalf of the U.S. Navy for the collision that occurred, because if it was the other way around, we would most likely see that the captain was not dismissed or publicly reprimanded for that matter, but the removal of the captain is most likely showing that the fault for the collision may have been inherently within the Navy, or at least the leadership of the captain and the senior officers of the aircraft carrier that may have led to the collision. Of course, that's more so speculation than anything. The Navy hasn't given an official statement as to why they dismissed the captain, but there is a pretty decent reason to believe that you wouldn't be dismissed if there was no wrongdoing on the part of the captain of that aircraft carrier. But moving on from that, and out of that little bit of news from the area of the Middle East, it is a little important to get back on into the pressing topic right now that's been on the minds of many people, and a large amount of people, because some military experts believe Ukraine won't survive more than 6 months without U.S. military aid. And a lot of people have been putting in their thoughts. And it crazily enough appears that a lot of people are believing that the Ukrainians will be fine even without U.S. support, as a load of people, which is actually shocking to me, said that that's false and Ukraine will get European Union funds instead and will be able to continue the war effort just fine. Some others are saying that's true, Ukraine would just be steamrolled, and some others are saying, probably, but it's more of a 50-50 chance than anything. But still, a lot of people have been talking about this, and it appears that everyone is actually believing that Ukraine can continue the war with or without the United States of America. And so, Matthew, what are people thinking about that, and what are you thinking about that as well?
So it looks like the majority, about 65% of the audience, said that is false because Ukraine will get EU funds and they can survive without US aid for longer than 6 months, obviously. While 14% said that is true, Ukraine would be defeated without US funds, and 14% said probably so, but it's a 50-50 chance. And on this one, I'm actually with the 65%. I'm pretty confident at this point that the EU is going to step up and make sure Ukraine is funded. And right now, remember, even though it looks kind of grim on the U.S. relations with Ukraine, the decision to cut funding to Ukraine has not yet been made. So we speculate that's probably what's going to happen, but we don't know that for a fact. It might keep going to Ukraine from the U.S. funds. We just simply don't know just yet. But it sounds like whatever the U.S. decision is, Ukraine will be fine in the end. And so they're going to survive for as long as they need to fight, basically, because there's so many frozen funds in the EU right now that have been frozen from Russian assets that they can simply unfreeze them and liquidate those assets and then buy military equipment on Ukraine's behalf, give it to them, and then keep fighting the war. So they'll be good to go either way. So I'm with the 65%. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that I'm with the 65% as well. I'll be honest, the United States is an incredibly important country economically and militarily, but that does not mean that the United States can make or break everything around the world all the time. There's a lot of good examples of that. But with the Ukraine war, I have a feeling that the United States might be overstepping its importance, because the reality is that if it is necessary, the Europeans can pick up the bill and probably continue to see the Ukrainians to victory as far as funding and support is concerned. Funding and support, mind you, I do want to point this out, is really the most important thing so far to keeping the Ukrainians above the sinking rate, for the large part, and keeping them going in the war. They have to have foreign funding. That is just something that is required largely for Ukraine to survive. And I know some people are going to be saying, oh, well, come on, that's not really giving them a lot of credit. No, it's actually true. Zelenskyy admits that. And not only that, that's nothing to be ashamed of. That's just the position that they're in. Economically, there's no way for them to be able to float the war because it would eat up pretty much the entirety of the Ukrainian GDP. Let me go show you all that real quick. That is the Ukrainian GDP, $178.8 billion. It's not much. And as a matter of fact, crazily enough, the Russians right now are spending about $200 billion per year on their armed forces in wartime conditions. And that's the maximum spending that they can most likely afford, but it's still more than the Ukrainian GDP. So with that in mind, they do require foreign support to be able to finance this kind of a war effort and to be able to keep the thing running, because there's just not enough money that passes through Ukrainian hands normally to be able to finance the war. It would literally eat up 100% of their GDP or more to be able to keep the war going. This means that foreign support is crucial to keeping the Ukrainians running. And some people are going to go, well, that's just terrible. It's not really, because when you remember, the United States of America would have never been able to win the Revolutionary War against Britain and largely declaring our independence from being British Crown colonies and becoming an independent country if it wasn't for substantive French financial support throughout the majority of the Revolutionary War, and also French military support as well. We would have never succeeded in winning in the Revolutionary War if it wasn't for that massive financial support from King Louis XV of France. I believe it was actually King Louis XVI of France who provided that support to the United States during the Revolutionary War. Some countries are just in positions like that, and that's just kind of the situation they're in. So Ukraine has to be able to get support to be able to keep the war going, or otherwise it just will not work. And so with that in mind, I say that that is entirely possible with the combined GDP of the EU, and let me go get that really quickly, which is $19 trillion that they actually could band together to finance the war effort, which is actually a crazy kind of a thing, because take a look at this pie chart. This actually is a pretty good one. This actually shows as of 2015, and this has changed a little bit because the Chinese GDP has grown a good bit since then. The GDP shares around the world, this whole area up here that's non-existent is everyone else, but this is the European Union and this is the United States in terms of nominal GDP figures in 2015. The EU actually has a lot of economic spending power, and apparently, according to Wikipedia, just to get you all another figure, the European Union's GDP is estimated to be around 20 trillion actually in 2025, or a slight difference of 29.01 trillion in the PPP, which unfortunately I forgot the actual abbreviation of that at this moment. For some reason, I'm slipping on remembering a couple of things tonight. But nevertheless, the European Union is incredibly wealthy, or really the entirety of Europe is wildly wealthy. So it really wouldn't stop them if they needed to be able to fund the war in Ukraine and keep it running for the large part. They actually could keep the Ukrainians going to victory. So with that in mind, I have a feeling that the Ukrainians will be fine regardless of the circumstance, although I would be honest, I would much rather see that the United States and Europe are combined in their support to Ukraine instead of seeing the Europeans footing the bill entirely to keep the Ukraine war going. As the leader of the Western sphere, the United States should be there supporting and financing the war in Ukraine. And also, Matthew, you know something else that hit me when I was talking about the position that the United States was in the Revolutionary War is that what in the world would the current administration say about the founding fathers of the United States of America if the Revolutionary War was happening today? Would they call them grifters and dictators for declaring war against the British and fighting for their independence and having to secure French financing?
Well, that's what I've been saying the whole time. In fact, I said that the other day. The United States has never been truly isolationist at any point in its history. And that there's a myth going around and also disinformation that we need to return to a time when we were isolationist when we never were. That's a complete myth. We never were that way. We've been involved in Europe before. Europe's been helping us defeat the British. There's been all kinds of things happening that have been not isolationist whatsoever toward the United States. So to suggest we're going to return to that is simply just trying to mislead people. So, you know, for us, and especially right now in today's economy, right now it's a globally connected economy and we rely on each other for trade. So to pretend like we can suddenly go back into a shell that we were never in the first place and simply exist on our island over here in the United States and North America, it's silly. Like it just can't work.
Man, imagine what would be said though, man, in the current foreign policy climate if the current administration was in France in the Revolutionary War and they were funding the Americans. George Washington is a dictator. He was elected General of the Continental Army in 1775, has been the general up to 1782. Absolutely ridiculous. They have conned the French government out of tons of money. We cannot afford it. It's like, what in the world would we be saying about them back then? Like, dude, they would have made Benjamin Franklin to be the biggest freaking grifter that ever lived because he was over there in Paris, man, literally just like getting palms greased. Like he was getting his palms greased and then sending most of it back to America. But really, like when you think about that, it's like that when you think about it from that kind of a perspective, it is goofy because to be entirely honest with y'all, the same arguments being made against Ukraine right now in the foreign policy sphere by the current administration could be made the exact same about the United States in the Revolutionary War. George Washington was elected by the Continental Congress in 1775 as the general of the Continental Army, without question. He was the supreme commander of all Continental Army forces across the entirety of the colonies. That was his position. It was never put up for an election again during the entirety of the Revolutionary War, which lasted from 1775 to 1783. So for about 7 straight years, George Washington pretty much ran the show as far as the war was concerned, and pretty much was the leader of the United States for that time during the war. Then you have Benjamin Franklin over in Paris, who was there asking the French government for money. And I want to remind you all that if the French had not financially supported the United States, which costed a fortune, the French Revolution would have never happened because the French government wouldn't have been that financially bankrupt from the 7 Years' War and the U.S. Revolutionary War to ever see the conditions of revolution actually happen. So in reality, the French government actually did bankrupt themselves by financing and supporting the American Revolution.
Honestly, here's the truth of the matter. The same push and pull that requires the United States to remain a nuclear power and cause us to nuclearize the way we did to become one of the strongest nuclear powers in the world is because when we developed them, for example, other countries had to develop them to get on an equal footing. It's a push and pull that countries have to abide by in order to remain basically with their power. If they don't match other countries, then they're going to lose their power. So if there's countries out there like China, which are power projecting quite heavily, the United States, if it wants to compete, it must also power project heavily themselves, which means, quote unquote, being the world police that people like to say is a bad thing. Now, while we do need to watch our spending, we don't need to spend like wild hyenas. We do need to make sure that we still are competing globally on the world stage to make sure we're not falling behind, or otherwise China will take that foothold and they'll fill the void. So, you know, it's just we can't ignore like the common sense push and pull here. And I think that's what's being ignored.
Yeah, that's something that's a little interesting to me. But something else, and this is something I find very interesting, man, when you think about it, is that the United States of America is in a completely different position than the French are in, because this was something that didn't exist at the time when France supported the United States, was massive amounts of foreign lending. The financial institutions that exist today to make that possible, or really to pretty much borrow money that doesn't exist, did not exist during France's time. And not only that, French, well, really governmental expenditures at that time were incredibly low. Like, a lot of people do not get that when we talk about the French situation, because now I see some people trying to say, aha, but the French bankrupted themselves, so they didn't have the money to support the United States, and the United States doesn't have the money to support Ukraine. That's not true. That's not true at all, as a matter of fact, because back then, a country could hardly run into debt without collapsing itself, because you actually had to have physical silver or gold to be able to finance these kinds of deals. So when they started to run out of money, I'll tell you what they actually did back in Paris back in the day during this time. When the French government needed to finance the 7 Years' War, which predated the Revolutionary War by just about 15 years, they actually went through Paris and confiscated everything in everyone's houses that was made of silver and melted it down into coins so that way they could get more money to finance the war with. I'm not kidding. They actually did that. Like, you can go pull it up and look at it. They actually did that. That's how you made money back then. That's how money existed. Nowadays, because it's a faith-based currency, money is pretty much just faith-based. There is no actual backing in silver or gold. So more silver does not mean more wealth. Nowadays, you can just make more money, and it's just the faith that the money has value that keeps it going. So this is
That's the beauty. That's the beauty of controlling the world's reserve currency. The U.S. dollar is the world's reserve currency, and that's why the U.S. is so worried about the quote-unquote BRICS dollar or some type of competing currency from popping up. That's why that is such a threat that the United States sees that as, because we can print our money and we can, basically go into debt as much as we want to, generally without a major problem. I know some people are going to be like, well, we do have a big deficit. Yes, we do, but we control the world's reserve currency, so that means a whole lot more than, for example, Russia, which does not control it, and they have a ruble, which is completely devalued and basically worthless right now, and they don't control their reserve currency because the world trades in USD, and they're trying to trade with China. I don't even know what currency they're trading with China right now. Is it in the Chinese currency or the ruble?
I don't really know. I would assume that's probably the renminbi. I think that's one of the few instances that the Chinese would probably allow the renminbi to be used.
Yeah, so they're like flipping back and forth between their currency, the Chinese currency, or whatever they're flipping in between. But the U.S. is over here with our own currency that everybody else in Europe, for example, they'll trade in the USD because people want to trade in it because it's valuable. So that's a huge advantage.
Yeah, and also, once again, I got to say, like, the foreign policy position on Ukrainians at this point is a pretty goofy one, because under any other historical circumstance, it makes no sense. Like, if we look at this on the American Revolutionary War perspective, which required a massive amount of financial support from the French to ever take off and actually be successful, the same arguments could have been made then, and that would have killed the United States before it even existed. And then, I mean, what is even crazy, to put this out there for everyone, is that even with the massive amount of French financial support that the U.S. was receiving during that, well, the Continental Army was receiving during that time, and the Continental Congress, they were hardly able to function. Like, the amount of money that they were actually working off of was fairly slim. And so the Continental Army was always under-equipped, always underfunded, always underpaid. It was a bad time. Like, honestly, like, if you look at it historically, like, a lot of folks would end up joining the Continental Army on a 6-month contract, and they'd never return after that 6-month contract was up. Like, it was a crazy time. Like, the pay was almost non-existent, and not only that, they hardly issued you anything because they didn't really have the money. But anyways, moving on from that, I do have to say that it's just been a wildly interesting discussion. We have a big question for all of y'all, though, because the French are doing the same thing they did back then for the United States, but they're doing it to Ukraine. And we've also been able to hear that the French President Emmanuel Macron, the French, suggests the U.S. is playing Putin to come to the negotiating table, and then we're going to roughshod the Russians. And a lot of people are wondering, is that real or not? Like, is that actually a true assessment, or is that wishful thinking by the president of France? And it seems that it's really split. Actually, crazily enough, this is almost split right down the middle. Some are saying that, yes, the United States is playing Putin, and they're about to give him the shakedown here in a little bit. Some people are saying, no, the U.S. probably really dislikes the Ukrainians, which isn't that far of a stretch either. Some people are saying only time's going to tell, and others are unsure and undecided. And to be honest with y'all, the poll is about as clear as my thoughts on it are as well. I'm pretty much split down all links on that one. But Matthew, what are people saying about it, and what are you thinking about it as well?
Okay, so this poll is all over the place. It looks like 33% said yes, the US is playing Vladimir Putin to get him to the negotiating table so he'll simply start talking, and then they're going to roughshod him real good. While 32% also said no, the US really dislikes Ukraine, they're going to screw them over, and 24% said only time is going to tell. And this was an interesting statement that Macron made today. He came out and basically said that the US is basically playing some sort of psychological games with Putin to make him feel like he's on top and make it seem like Ukraine is at odds with the United States, to drag Putin out of his hiding hole in his bunker, to bring him to the table to start talking, to at least get him yapping, so that way that the US president can come in and basically roughshod him and tell him how it's going to be. I personally have a hard time believing that. I'll be perfectly honest. But I'm not going to rule it out because we obviously don't know what's in the mind of the U.S. president right now. Maybe he's playing some sort of elaborate game, but you'd have to be in his head. As probably as painful as that would be, you'd have to actually get there and figure out what he's thinking to actually know what's going to happen. So to say for certain what's going to happen, I don't know, but I have some doubts that is the case. I really doubt Macron's statements. But Enforcer, what say you?
Frivolous Activities asked, has Macron even met with the president? No. The answer to that's no. He has not. So I think this is a shot in the dark, kind of like everyone else is making at this point. But I would have to be honest, this is the most roundabout way to get to negotiations that I would have ever seen. I'll be honest with you all, I'm kind of in the camp of the 33% that says the U.S. government probably really dislikes the Ukrainians because there's no reason to do this at all. It just doesn't make any sense. If this is a way to get the Russians to the negotiating table, then this is a really goofy way, because we moved from talking about Ukraine, and now the Russians are now speaking about having U.S. forces withdraw from all of Eastern Europe, which makes no sense. It's how in the world is that moving us towards shaking down the Russians? I wouldn't really know. I'd be entirely honest with y'all. I largely would have to be with the 33% at this point, that there probably is not really going to be a shakedown that happens. I just don't think so. And I know a lot of people are thinking, well, that doesn't really sound optimistic. And look, to be honest, folks, there's no point in being optimistic at this point, because we were entirely proven wrong on what we've been saying over the prior year about the incoming administration. We were wrong on it. So and also wrong on many other assessments that they would have made about Ukraine that would be sensible and reasonable. So with that in mind, there really is no reason to try and be optimistic about what the current administration is going to do, because I'd be entirely honest, with all the actions that they've been taking in the foreign policy sector against Europe and really all of our trading partners and allies, there really is no reason to believe that they're going to shake down the Russians, because they're roughshotting our allies while at the same time pretty much giving an open door to the Russian Federation to practically secure whatever terms they want at this point. So, and also on top of that, what would that achieve? Another thing, thinking it out all the way, what would that achieve for us to fake break the Russians into getting to the negotiating table and then shake them down? Then they're still going to walk away, and there's going to be nothing achieved at that point. So I don't really know what the point of that would be, because if they're not willing to get to the negotiating table normally with the terms that we would lay out, which apparently Macron's saying that the U.S. still believes they want to lay out, why in the world would deceiving them to get them to the negotiating table and then make them more susceptible to listening to the offer? That doesn't really make a lot of sense.
Could it just be that maybe, because of course Macron and the European countries, they've been very outspoken against the United States. They've been very clear that they do not like the position the U.S. is taking on Ukraine right now. Could it be that maybe the U.S. is maybe threatening them in the background, and maybe that's why they're suddenly backing down and saying that there's a master plan at play here? Because like you're saying, it really doesn't make sense, this sudden shift, because why weren't they included and why weren't they informed about those before? And why all of a sudden they just become aware of it now? Seems kind of odd.
Yeah, that's something that I'd have to agree with. It seems a little bit odd. Maybe there is a possible threat that's been levied in the background that may have some significance that's made them back off a bit. I don't really know. But it just doesn't seem to me to make much sense to make a statement like that, because, I'm just going to be entirely frank here. I'd have to say that the current administration wasn't necessarily a great negotiator when it came to the Israeli ceasefire, which, this didn't even make any sense. They negotiated the ceasefire. It was incredibly lopsided towards Hamas. Then they all agree on the ceasefire. Hardly any of the hostages are released. We then give them an ultimatum to release all the hostages by a certain day, or we're going to obliterate them. Then we don't do that. Then we say we're going to develop them into beachfront property and expel millions of people from the Gaza Strip, and then we don't do that either. And at the end of it all boiled down to, that was just a bad deal and nothing really came out of it, and we acted on the deal. So why in the world would we go from that, which I would honestly say was poorly negotiated and really against Israel or the West's interests, and then say up in Ukraine, now we have a master schemer here? Like, that makes no sense, because the master scheming did not exist in the Israel-Hamas ceasefire agreement that was made just a couple of weeks back. That would be my honest assessment of that. So I don't really know if there would be any master negotiating going on in Ukraine. And I haven't really seen any master negotiating going on in any other direction either. Like, for example, with the sanctioning of Canada and Mexico, where was the master negotiating that? Like, I'll tell you all what happened. The threat of the sanctions was imposed, and the actual sanctions were put into ink. And then the stock market nearly started to crash. So then, and also not only that, but there was a massive uproar literally throughout the entire U.S. government. So then by the next day, that was all backtracked on, and then we went with practically nothing. Because when you think about it, with the accusations that were levied by the U.S. administration against Mexico and Canada, they were incredibly serious in form. So then we go from that to levying sanctions on them, and then the next day we go, okay, well, they're going to send 10,000 troops to the Mexican border, and that will be good enough. It's like, that didn't even really deal with all of the serious accusations that were made by the U.S. administration. That didn't really seem like master negotiating. It seems almost like the administration on a foreign policy and trade level stepped in it, saw that it wasn't doing well for the domestic situation immediately, so then immediately backtracked off of it, so that way the stock market wouldn't start to implode, because everyone knew that sanctioning our two largest trading partners may not be the best of moves to make.
And also another example, and once again, I'm not attacking the individual. I'm attacking the actions here that are being taken. So I'm looking at it from a solely geopolitical perspective. I'm not saying anything about the guy personally or what his personal beliefs are or anything like that. Y'all can make up your minds on that. But one thing that proves to me that something is not being done correctly here is, for example, if the United States truly wants to get Ukraine's minerals, like, understandably, we do want more access to minerals. That is something the U.S. would have an interest in. You do not send an emissary over to Ukraine with a contract and put used car salesman tactics on Zelenskyy to force him to sign it, pressure him into signing it, and then when he doesn't, try to punish him for not going along with it. That's typically not the way you want to negotiate with your allies. And in fact, that makes them very weary of you from that point forward, because then they're like, oh, well, the U.S. just tried to come in and screw me over and steal my minerals worth $500 billion. And the U.S. has only provided about, $80 billion plus in military assistance. And they're trying to take advantage of us. So, at that point, the trust is getting eroded so much that you really can't even negotiate at all, which is something that you don't want to do in geopolitics. That's just common sense. You want to have your allies trust you. You don't want to have them mistrust you at every turn. So that's just not a good thing either.
Yeah, I mean, and also something that people don't get. This isn't the international sphere, and this is kind of why I have an issue with people who are incredibly ignorant on foreign affairs getting involved in it, because they don't know how it works. You can't go around and act like it's reality TV and run your mouth and talk smack at your allies and then act like they're going to trust you the next day. Dealing with other countries is an incredibly fragile affair, especially when you're trying to build a friendship and a relationship with them. You have to treat them like they are going to go off if you say anything offensive to them. So if you say anything offensive to a country at all, you've just completely eroded the trust that's been built over years at that point in that one instance. So you have to be incredibly careful with that kind of stuff, because it's very easy to run people away. I mean, look at the Russians. They did that strongman, loudmouthing kind of a business to everyone in Eastern Europe, and now they're all in NATO because they got scared of the Russians and they ran from them. So you got to be incredibly careful with that kind of a deal, because it just will not end up well for the large part if you loudmouth or badmouth or really piss on every single one of your allies all day, every day. They're eventually going to go, we can't really trust these people, and we've got to move on and distance ourselves from them.
And also, like, for example, when Zelenskyy rightfully called out and said, we can't sign this mineral agreement because it's not fair to Ukraine. It takes way too much of our resources, and we're getting no future security guarantees from the United States in exchange for $500 billion worth of our materials. Zelenskyy says, I'm not signing that. And then all of a sudden, the United States comes out and starts trying to punish Zelenskyy and tell him, you've made a bad move by going against us and this and that and that. It's like, no. It's like the United States has got caught red-handed. They got caught trying to basically, I don't know if extort is the right word, but they got caught trying to take advantage of a foreign country, which is Ukraine. And honestly, I'll be straight up honest. I've studied political science. I've studied things like that. I've studied treaties and things like that before. I've never seen an attempt in modern history quite like that one that's that
Of a
bold to literally
shakedown.
go. Yeah, to literally go in and basically try to shake them down in the middle of them being in a crisis. They're at war right now, and they're fighting for survival, and then try to shake them down at the same time. That's like shaking down a victim of a crime. It's like they're literally just got done being victimized, and you're going to try to shake them down. It's like not only is that just not a good thing to do on a geopolitical level, that's just a scummy thing to do as just like as a person level.
Yeah, but one thing I will say is that there's a lot of that goes on these days. Now, against belligerents like the Russian Federation, which we really have no reason to have diplomatic relations with, you can badmouth them and loudmouth them all you want because they're an aggressor and a rival of the United States. So that's something that you can go to town with every day of the week. But when you talk in between allies, you'd never want to be strongly worded. Like, for example, there was a little documentary that Matthew put out a while ago that, is now only on Patreon, unfortunately. But in one of the clips, well, actually, I don't know if we actually included that clip in the end, Matthew. Did we? Did we include the Danish diplomat?
Oh no, I left it out for copyright concerns.
Yeah, because there was a Danish diplomat that said "F off to the United States." I don't know what the hell it is these days with people believing that those kinds of statements can fly in a diplomatic setting, like no matter what, especially amongst countries that are supposed to be allies. But you can't do that kind of stuff. It's just not right. Like that is how you start to erode friendships, and not only that, you can offend entire countries doing such things. So I don't know what it is with people these days acting like foreign policy is reality TV and you can just fly off the handle. That's not how diplomacy works. Like maybe you do that in your personal life and you go off on your wife or your kids, or you go off on your boss, or maybe you go off on another company that you're having business dealings with. But in the foreign policy world, when we have trillions of dollars on the line, and not only that, there's hundreds of millions of people at home that are counting on us, you don't fly off the handle. That's just poor emotional management for the large part. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that somewhat well. But with that, it's time for us to actually move on into a couple of questions, because we have been a little long-winded tonight. I mean, holy moly, we still got a good amount of news to cover, actually. But still, Matthew, what kind of questions do we have? And also, I got to say this, a huge thanks to everyone watching tonight. We've actually had a peak viewership of 8.2 thousand people, and while that doesn't seem as high as normal, crazily enough, we've actually seen that 40,000 people have watched the stream so far, which is exceptionally high for the amount of live viewers that we've had. So that's incredibly interesting. But Matthew, what do we got?
All right, so our first super chat of the night is a massive $200 donation from Not a Fan of Cranky, and thank you very much for that massive $200 donation, and we appreciate it very much. And YouTube said that was your first ever super chat, but I could have sworn you threw one in the other day, so I'm not sure if YouTube's got that wrong or what, but nonetheless, huge thanks for the largest super chat of the night. We do appreciate that. And they said a small price to pay for actual news, and look forward to the 10 p.m. Eastern daily.
And I gotta say, thank you so much for the massive support. Not a fan of Crinky. And thank you for helping this channel to keep on running. And thank you so much for massively supporting the channel and helping it to keep on rolling. Because if it was not for folks like you, we would not be able to make this thing possible. We would not be able to keep it rolling. And I got to thank you so much once again for that. Because if it wasn't for folks like you who helped us to keep this thing rolling and helped us to make this thing possible, we just wouldn't be able to keep the show running. It's thanks to folks like you who go out of their way to support a channel that you do not have to support, that makes this channel reality for everyone every single day, with our special kind of news coverage, keeping it non-political and just largely focused on foreign policy and what's in America and the West's interests. It's wonderful to know that folks like you really do enjoy it, and I love to know that you look forward to the show every single day, because we try incredibly hard to make sure that it is a show that people can enjoy. We hope that the analysis is incredibly good. We hope that when we put out jokes, which have been seldom lately, that they're pretty good. And I got to thank you so much once again for that massive support, because that is the biggest support of the night, probably the biggest support that we've seen in a week or two, and it's helping this channel to keep on running and helping us to keep the lights on and helping us to keep this thing rolling. And so with that, thank you so much once again, and we're on to the next one.
All right, and our next one here goes to Con LSA, who puts in another massive $100 donation. And thank you very much, Con, for that support and for being a longtime channel legend and viewer as well. And Con said, we've done nothing for Ukraine. We've sent 30 Abrams tanks, and we have over 6,000 Abrams tanks. We sent 300 Bradleys, and we have over 10,000 Bradleys. Not getting political for me is difficult with our leaders. Well, one thing I will say is this. First of all, like we said, thank you very much, Con, for that support. I will say that I don't think it's fair necessarily to say we've done nothing for Ukraine. We've done quite a bit. And I guess at the end of the day, the truth is we don't actually have to support Ukraine at all. That's the truth of it. We should. It's the right thing to do. But if someone wants to say, let's just look at the bare basics, we don't have to support Ukraine. But, like I said, we should. So we have done something for them. We could have done more. But I think the big deal is, as long as we can keep funding them the way we've been funding them, to me, that's good enough. I wouldn't say to go too much over that, because we can't get too crazy, because we do have other interests around the world we have to maintain, like, for example, protecting Taiwan and Israel as well. We don't want to get too bogged down in Ukraine, but we need to make sure they can survive. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say, I thank you for the massive support and helping this channel to keep on running, Con. But I would say that the United States has done a lot for Ukraine. Like in the past, we have done a good bit. But I would say that in the previous administration, I didn't believe it was enough. And in the current administration, it is just hell to pay at this point on everything, it seems. Which, of course, obviously is not in American Western interest. If it was up to me, the war in Ukraine wouldn't have started. And that's something that I'm sure many of y'all have heard before. But let me rewind time for all of y'all and explain what was going on and the ineptitude that was seen at that point. When the Russian military buildup began in 2021, and it was clear as a bell at that point that something was going on, and the Russians said they were just conducting military exercises around the entirety of the Ukrainian border, that was already the telltale sign to the United States that war was coming. I didn't believe that war was going to happen. I thought that would be suicidal and stupid for the Russians to pull off. But practically everyone in a knowing position knew that war was coming at that point against Ukraine from the Russian Federation. If the United States had been smart at that point, what we would have done is that we would have moved U.S. peacekeeping forces into Ukraine and moved the negotiating position to that right there. It wouldn't have been a war at all, because the Russian Federation would have known that to move into Ukraine, they're going to war with the United States. And to go to war with the United States would be a nuclear conflict, so it's best to take the negotiating off-ramp right now before a war even began. That would have been the move to make. A lot of people would have said that that was bold and ballsy back then, and that was putting American lives at risk, but what it would have done is it would have saved millions of lives so far that have been irreparably damaged, both in the civilian world in Ukraine, the military of Ukraine, and the Russian army, and everyone else beyond that's been affected by this war. And not only that, it would have avoided watching the rest of Eastern Europe possibly be put under Putin's crosshairs in the future. That kind of an initiative would have completely avoided this entire thing. The last administration sat on its ass, just to be entirely honest, let the war begin, and then when the war begins, they do support the Ukrainians and support them in their effort. But at the same time, then we hardly support them, and the Ukrainians are always saying it's good support, but it's not enough at the given moment in time. And that's largely true, because there's something that people don't get, because people go, well, we gave them all that damn money. And it's like, well, there's a little bit of a caveat to that. We didn't give them enough shells. Superior firepower speaks volumes. Yes, we can give them tons of Bradleys and Abrams, but if they only have enough ammunition to fire those guns once a day on each vehicle, that's hill of beans of difference how many APCs or tanks they get. We could give them 30, and if we gave them enough rounds to be firing literally the entire ammo storage of that Abrams daily, that is far better than giving them 300 Abrams. And that was always the issue, is that no matter what, Europe and the United States was never giving the Ukrainians enough munitions to actually reach firepower parity with the Russians and be par on par with them shot for shot. That never happened. So the Ukrainians were always largely on the defensive, or even in offensives. It was incredibly difficult because the Russians could just leverage superior artillery power to largely suppress or stop Ukrainian forces from getting any kind of significant leverage, which they clearly would have had if they had firepower parity or if they had superior firepower due to the amount of munitions that they received. Those kinds of initiatives were not seen under the last administration, and we have criticized them in the past for those kinds of failings, because if we're going to do something in American and Western interest, it has to be full in. There's no half in or half out. It's all the way in or it's all the way out, and it would have been better to be all the way in that kind of a situation. Now the current administration is moving pretty much at this point on an official standing to acting like Ukraine is not something that we should support at all, which is completely against American and Western interest. The last administration, at least in spirit, was behind the Ukrainians and behind Western interests and cornering our adversaries like the Russians into a corner, but the current administration just isn't at all. The last one half-assed did it, but they were still behind it. The current one, I can't even really tell if in the end they're really going to be behind it or not. And that's where a big issue lies at this point, is because this war has gone on a long time. If we start to give concessions to the Russians, you give them an inch and they are going to take a mile. That phrase will end up being true to the finish. And if we deceive them into the negotiating table and then we roughshod them in, I don't know why I'm mispronouncing that so much, roughshod them then, we're still going to be back to square one. They're not going to agree to anything at the negotiating table, and then we're still forced to support the Ukrainians well on into the future. But now the president has gone out of the way to pretty much slander the entire Ukrainian government and the military. So, then what's the standing there? We're going to look like fools and then continue to support them at that point, because now the president has to eat his own foot, like I've done on the show a couple of times, and then just support Ukraine anyways, because the Russians shafted him at the negotiating table because he pretty much conned them to get there. So I
Although
don't.
that is possible though, because so far, just as a neutral observation, like for example, things like the tariffs, it looked like he was going head first into that, and then he sort of backed off of it and did a 180, and somehow it ended up working out. So it's possible that even though the relations look like they've gotten very bad publicly, that he could turn around and decide to say that maybe Putin is going off the deep end, and we should keep funding Ukraine 100%, if not maybe 110%. But it's just iffy.
Yeah, I mean that is true, but the thing is that at the end of the day, because I'm seeing some people bringing up some other points, like for example, one that I saw that was interesting. The U.S. and Europe, Ellen Vermont said, the U.S. and Europe were afraid of Russia, were always afraid of escalation and nuclear weapons. The thing is, though, and people are always scared of this when it comes down to it, and this is why history repeats itself. People are scared of looking the gun down the barrel and saying, if you're going to do something, do it, and I'll make sure you pay for it dearly. Everyone's always scared of doing that when it comes down to it, because no one wants to be that person who's having to look down the barrel of a gun. But if you do that, and you actually are brave enough to do that, like for example, I'll say this, like Kennedy did in the Cuban Missile Crisis, it usually turns out a lot better than the alternative. Because think if Kennedy didn't look down the barrel of that gun that the Soviets had in our face with with Soviet weapons and nuclear weapons in Cuba, think if he did not do that, what the world might look like today. It could be an entirely different world, because at that point, the Soviets had us by the balls as far as the nuclear standoff was going, and there was nothing we could have done about it. So if he didn't look that straight down the barrel, we may be in a far worse situation. World War I and World War II could have been completely avoided if the United States in World War I joined the conflict in 1914 and looked down the barrel then. Many lives would have been saved in the long run compared to what really happened. And in World War II, if everyone had looked down the barrel in 1936 at Hitler and said, if you're going to try and annex Austria and the Sudetenland, we are going to curb stomp you and your government, many lives would have been saved well on into the future. Like, it's always the case when you look back in history, if people had acted assertively and boldly when they needed to, and actually looked down the barrel of that gun, that proverbial gun, so to speak, many lives would have been saved down the road, and things would have ended up far better. If Britain and France alone, not placing the blame on them, but it was really their situation at the time. If Britain and France alone had not agreed to the Munich Conference and had gone to war with Germany in 1938, there was no way that they would have been able to survive that war. They would have failed that significantly, and because of that, we would have seen that there would be no such thing. No one would even know in the modern world what the Holocaust was, because it would have never happened. No one would know who Adolf Hitler even was. He would have looked like some sort of a weird, kooky guy who was in power for only a couple of years, and then he was gone and done with. No one would have ever seen the Cold War happen. World War II would have been completely avoided in Europe. The only war that would have happened was the war in the Pacific in between the United States, the Japanese, the French, and the British. It would have been an entirely different era of history if people had had the courage back then to look down the barrel of the gun and go, we will do what we must because it's the right thing to do, and we're not going to live in fear and cowardice against our adversaries and enemies. If we did that now, we would be in a far better position. If we had done that in 2021, things would be different now. But right now, we have to play the cards we're dealt with. That's the situation we're in. People continue to let fear drive decision making. We have to have some boldness and courage. Fortune favors the bold, and we have to be bold to be able to assert our interest and our sphere of influence out there around the entirety of the world. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, and I thank you once again for the support, Con, and I hope that does address that incredibly well, and thank you so much for the massive support and being a big fan of the Lee Spring Army, because folks like you help us to keep this thing running and help it to keep on rolling day in and day out. And so with that, we are on to the final question of this segment, and then we're getting right back into the news.
And the last one of the segment is going to go to BC Skyman, the channel legend, who puts in a $60 donation. Hey! And of course, a big shout out to BC for always supporting the channel and helping to keep it running. And it's good to see you once again, BC. And I sadly do not see a comment attached. So there's nothing to say, but thank you very much. And Enforcer, what say you?
And I got to thank you so much for the massive support, BC Skyman, a true channel legend and a genius. And I got to thank you so much for being around forever and helping this thing to keep on running, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this thing possible, and we wouldn't be able to keep it rolling. He didn't throw in a comment, but he always says incredibly kind things when he does, and I always thank you so much for being a massive supporter of the Lee Spring Army and the channel at large. And so with that, a huge thanks to you so much once again. And with that, we are on to the next one. Also, Alan Piazza said, don't you mean 2014 when Russia took Crimea? Yeah, you could say then. But as far as the war in Ukraine that we're dealing with right now, the actual invasion, I would say that if we had a lot more balls, then we could have completely avoided the situation that we're seeing right now. But yes, I would agree with that. If we had some balls or really some gall back then, we could have completely avoided the annexation of Crimea as well, and also the Donbass conflict that began because of that. But moving on from that and on into the rest of the news, because it finally is time for some more news. We were able to hear today in a diplomatic wording that the French believe that this is some kind of a diplomatic scheme. We already covered this, but Macron has stated that the U.S. administration is playing a convoluted game of psychological manipulation to get to the negotiating table. I've already discussed this in depth, how I believe this may not be the case and it just wouldn't work. It doesn't really make logical sense. So I don't know why Macron made the statement, but maybe there's some merit behind it. Who knows? But moving on from that and into Poland, we were able to hear that Poland wants to step up support, and this was a tweet from Donald Tusk.
Oh.
A lot of people probably
Donald Tusk.
A lot of people are about to get triggered. But anyways, here's what Donald Tusk said in a tweet today. Enough talking, it's time to act. 1, let's finance our aid for Ukraine from the Russian frozen assets. There's about $270 billion of dollars of those assets that are currently being held by the Europeans. 2, let's strengthen air policing, the Baltic Sentry, and the EU borders with Russia. And 3, let's swiftly adopt new fiscal rules to finance the EU security and defense now. Very interesting to see that Donald Tusk is beginning to lead the charge to support Ukraine financially as Europe stands alone. But with that, we are going to be moving on from that little bit of news and on into our next bits, as we were able to see that in the Chernobyl exclusion zone, work is beginning by Ukrainian efforts to be able to try and repair the damage to the sarcophagus and also assess the exact damage that was caused. We see here them filming as the Ukrainian teams are on top of the sarcophagus trying to survey the exact damage that was caused. But nevertheless, moving on from that little bit of news and down towards the area of northern Kyiv, we were also able to see a Ukrainian AA team claiming an amazing hit on a Garan 2 today. You see them firing, and it was a dead-on hit, clipping the left wing off instantly and sending the Garan into a spiral. We now see it hitting the ground and exploding. Woo! Very nice to see, and what a hit. That was an amazing hit right there. We also got to see an Su-27 of the Ukrainian Air Force in a brand new air superiority gray. I'm not going to lie, this is actually a lot better than I was thinking it was going to look. It's incredibly good looking. Usually we would see in the past that the Ukrainians use a form of digital tricolor camouflage that usually is a summer or winter variant, meaning that the summer one is largely a blue scale and the winter version is a gray scale. But it appears that now the Ukrainians are going for an air superiority gray paint scheme, very similar to that used on the F-15 Eagles of the F-15 series of aircraft in the United States, or the Eurofighter Typhoon, or really any other aircraft that is currently in NATO's service. I'm not going to lie, it actually is a very good looking livery, and I think it looks pretty freaking clean on an Su-27. Really nice overall. But moving on from that and into our next bit of news inside of the Kursk Oblast, we were able to see that a little Vuhledar had an unfortunate incident. It was carrying mortar rounds to the front lines, an FPV drone hit it, and the mortar rounds exploded, pretty much turning the Vuhledar into confetti. But here's the clip. This, by the way, is the back of the Vuhledar. Y'all can see most of it doesn't exist. It was blown away when the mortar rounds exploded in the back of the Vuhledar. And there's some of the mortar rounds. It appears that some of them did not explode. But that's the end of the clip. And gotta say, Vuhledars may not be the best thing to transport mortar rounds in. We also got to see some Ukrainian snipers doing some work out there on the front today as well. Take a gander at this. Bing! And there goes one.
Oh, bink. Oh, look, they're playing tic-tac-toe too, and it says GAG.
I don't know what that means.
I don't either. Interesting.
I, oh, the gag. They've always
there
been
it is in
known for
bold
their
now.
excellence. Like, we tried to, like, just not really mention it, and then it just came up in bold. So, like, I guess we got to mention it now. But we also got to see some Ukrainian engineers hard at work. Check them out. They do some pretty cool stuff in this video. First off, we can see that it's the break of dawn here. And we see that they set up a bridge over a crossing. We now see the Ukrainians clearing out a minefield with a mine-clearing device on the front of their MBT. Passing by some trenches. We're not really sure if those are Ukrainian or Russian-controlled. But we see the mine clearer pretty much making its own road for the armored vehicles. And we can see here that it appears that the main tank with the mine-clearing device did run into a mine and it detonated. And we now see some sort of fire happening by a tank in the rear of the leading part of the convoy as it's making its way through the field.
Oh no, it's turning into a disaster. Look at that.
Oh no, it's not a disaster. It's just the Ukrainians clearing out a minefield. You know, it's all good, man. But we can see
I saw stuff falling around and I thought it was over.
Oh no, it's all good. But we now see a Ukrainian bridge-laying vehicle moving up to this destroyed bridge that the Russians demolished, and now laying out another improvised bridge to help out with the crossings.
Man, can you get your mouse cursor off the screen?
Man, that's not mine. That's theirs.
I know, I'm joking.
Man, that's not mine. What are you talking about? But anyways, we can see that they laid out the bridge span over the broken segment. We can already see that crossings are occurring by the Ukrainians. And we see the Ukrainian vehicles continuing to press on forward. Of course, the Ukrainian engineers have been doing amazing work in the Kursk Oblast to ensure the Ukrainian defensive and offensive efforts are entirely successful.
Someone said, I never knew that wild hyenas spent a lot. Oh, they do. They spend like crazy. That's why they're wild hyenas.
Man, I tell you, when you work in retail, you run into a lot of hyenas.
Then laughed like that hyena off that Disney movie.
No, they laugh like Paulie from The Sopranos. Yeah, you know, something like that. Like, you know,
What do you got, Tourette's or something?
What do you got, Tourette's or something? No, I don't. Well, you act like it. So I forgot what he said. But anyways,
Gotta go get that checked. You sound like you caught it.
But moving on from that into our next clip, we also got to see a Russian rocket launcher. Behold the might and power of the Nekrasmoshinya Legendaria Russian army, or Rossiyski army. This is an improvised Russian launcher, Russian rocket launcher. Some might call it the Russian Panzerschreck. Whatever it is, it's terrible.
Man, they're blurring it out like it's something obscene.
Man.
They're only blurring out a small little bit right there and it keeps moving around. It's completely useless, actually. Somebody didn't know how to do motion tracking.
And honestly, see, also, by the way, I just fast forwarded 40 seconds into the clip. They're still trying to prep this rocket launcher, by the way, everyone. It's apparently a very slow system to fire. Might be easier to just walk over there and do the job yourself. So they finally finished the setup for the Panzerschreck. Mind you, this is supposed to be like some sort of an anti-tank weapon.
The Panzerschreck should get out of my swamp.
What are you doing in my swamp? Bing! You know, and then it fires like a recoilless rifle pinging noise. And we now see him picking it up. It appears that it's ready. And I have no good feelings about this. They've got like a shield and everything. Okay, so he stands to fire. Oh my god! Oh my god! Like,
oh my god! Like what? I don't even comprehend what just happened.
Let's watch it again. Shoulder dislocated. Like I promise you, like you know, I feel like the recoil management on that system may have not been good. Like I have a feeling that they didn't really manage the whole recoil side of this all too. You know what? I just realized there's audio on this video. What did it sound like when they fired
Чуть-чуть
this?
выше. Вот, хорош, все, хорош.
Oh.
Пуск!
You know,
Oh
I
my
just
god! Like how the thing didn't even blow up. Like it just actually fired normally, and it just blew the guy around like that, like a leaf.
this is the Russian army, mind everyone. like this is the army that we supposedly said might actually beat Europe on the battlefield. They made this. Let's just watch this one more time.
Пуск!
I don't even understand how somebody can like move like that.
You know, I just realized what that is, Matthew. I just realized what that rocket is.
What is it?
It's a rocket tube. Let me go show this to you because it only will make sense if I show it. The S-80 rocket pod.
And also, the guy was fine at the end of it. By the way, he just got up and walked away fine. He wasn't injured or anything.
No one was harmed in the making of this video, but this is the rocket tube that they were using. It's a part of an S-8 rocket pod. So what they did is they took one of the tubes out of this rocket pod, turned it into this garbage, and then tried to fire it and thought that this guy would be able to handle the recoil. And obviously he's not. Like, it's an 80 millimeter rocket. It's not even designed to be recoilless. Like, generally, so for some of y'all who may not know a lot about anti-tank weapons, they're made to be recoilless because if they're not, this is going to happen.
Пуск!
That will happen. Like, that will happen
God.
every time. So the round is not designed to be recoilless. It has a lot of recoil. So these idiots took a tube out of an S-8 rocket pod, made it into an anti-tank weapon, and then tested. Obviously, they can't use that. Like, that's just ridiculous. Like, it just would not work.
That's not a Panzerschreck. That's a rocket from a helicopter, actually.
Dude, that's a Blietteschreck. But also, here's the Panzerschreck for reference. That's actually what they look like.
Aha, yes, I've seen those before. But that is so stupid. Like, why the hell they think they could take a rocket off a helicopter? Literally, oh, it's the bad. It's destructing. That's like something I would make or something if I was in the meme game. But why would they take a helicopter rocket and think that somebody could absorb that? It's literally being absorbed by a massive helicopter, the recoil from it. That's just like no common sense.
No common sense at all. And also, someone said, is he still alive? Yeah, he's still alive. But as far as a coroner were concerned, it is a closed casket as far as the operational abilities of this rocket launcher. But that is only figuratively. But moving on from that and from the Panzerschreck here, which it appears that they attempted to make and failed to make, we're now going to be moving on into our next clip where we are able to see Hind.
Man, that should be censored.
Man, that honestly, man, the degeneracy of the internet these days, just showing Hinds like this all over the place, ridiculous. Yeah. There needs to be some sort of
some coverings of your Hinds.
Man, they need to be checking if you're 18 or older to see this kind of stuff. Jeez! But moving on from that, we also got to see a beautiful moment filmed by a Russian soldier of an Mi-28. There they are, handsome. Come on, dear. And here they come. Look how nicely he went sideways, bleed. Guys. If that's some effing shit he's doing right there. Is that ours?
Is that ours? Well, you gotta figure that out.
It's fuming. He got hit, didn't he?
It's fuming. It's angry.
F you. Here comes the Mi-8 that's a part of the group that Mi-28 was in. What the F are they doing? I don't understand.
That's not shocking.
It's fuming, see? Yeah. And that one looks like he's evacuating it. Looks like a helicopter got effed up by an FPV.
Look at this guy. He's like, when he turned the camera around, I was like, yep, that's a Russian.
Turned it around and you heard that sound bit. Oh, hell no. You know, something like that. It's like, but beyond that, to explain to y'all what happened, what this guy was watching in this clip, the Mi-28 actually got hit by a Ukrainian FPV out of view of the camera before the video began, near to the tail section. So the Mi-28 is actually losing most likely hydraulic pressure and also thrust the entire time it's flying. So that Mi-8 that's following behind it is attempting to make sure to stay with it, so that way if the pilots have to force land the helicopter into a field, they can immediately pick them up and get them out of there. So what this guy thought he was filming was a successful Russian helicopter mission. What he actually ended up catching was the aftermath of an Mi-28 going down as it was leaving the line after getting hit by an FPV. So what a catch by that Russian. I think he inadvertently caught a beauty and then also an ugly right here at the end. I mean, it was like a 2-in-1 kind of a deal right here.
Man, you should open the bar and call that boy Coyote Ugly.
man, dude. Also, man, when he went into the barber, they said, "What would you like?" He said, "Give me that Abraham Lincoln, please."
I told no lies, but I do actually. I lied.
Dude, this guy said, the barber said, "What would you like this time?" He said, 407 years ago. There we go. He's like, I know what you mean. Just say less. But very interesting.
Less is right. This guy could say a lot less and it'd be a blessing.
Dude, Mom. 1 second. I gotta get the comparison, man, because it's just gonna be too good. Oh my goodness. 1 second. Let me go get the.
This guy was actually honest, though. The other guy's not.
Well, I mean, he was honest, man. At the end of the video, he was like, "I think the helicopter got effed off." You know, it's like, it's Honest Abe. He's back. Welcome back, Honest Abe, in Russia of all places. That is just crazy. But moving on from that, big shout out to the 16th president of the United States, and also apparently Wolverine Lincoln, who's at the top of the search results for Abraham Lincoln. I don't know why.
Signed print. Like signed by who? Lincoln.
I don't even like Abraham Lincoln in his clause of death signed. Yeah, I have a question about that. I don't understand. Oh, I don't understand, dude. Abraham Lincoln came out of the grave and went, "That's lit," and signed it. Like,
I'm gonna sign this thing.
he said, if I'm gonna be reincarnated for anything, it's going to be to sign this. Like, but also, by the way, if y'all want a funny story, the reason why Abraham Lincoln had the beard is that he originally looked like this. Without a beard, and he was at a train station during his presidential campaign right before he became president, and a 6-year-old girl at the train station said, "Ugh, you're ugly. You ought to grow out a beard or something." And he actually said, I think she's right. And so then he grew out a beard, like right before he became president.
Interesting. So he did the old chin line trick.
Yeah, he was like, "I gotta hide that chin line." But honestly, he had a pretty chiseled chin line. Like, that's a pretty distinct kind of a chin line right there.
Man, I don't know what was up with his cheeks, though. It's like, I don't know if this was like, accurate or not, but what the hell was up with his cheeks? It's like they go inward.
Oh, no, this is accurate, dude. That's a literal photograph of him.
That guy's bone structure was built different.
Dude, those cheeks, man, he could actually cut someone with those. Like, he slashed his face by him. He might end up slashing him. You know what I mean? It's like, geez. But nevertheless, there is. What is up with people and like wanting to like do things with Abraham Lincoln's pictures? You know what I mean? Like, also, what is this,
bro? Why'd they do that ears like that?
Dude, they got him out here looking like that Caesar like ape from Planet of the Apes. Like, why'd they do him like that? They did him dirty. Like, what the hell?
Like pimping on the side or something like that. He's got the purple chair down there. He's got the coat.
Bro, he said, "I got hoes in Georgetown." Oh my lord, dude. Oh my goodness. But beyond that, nothing beats the 1 second, the Theodore Roosevelt political cartoons, if we can find them. I'm sure they're here somewhere. What in the hell?
Picture they take of him laughing like every single time, and they like, I don't know why people were obsessed with that one photo of him laughing.
Why did they do him dirty on this book cover?
I don't like it when these like books like take people's heads and like enlarge them by 100. It's like, what who thought that looked good?
Yeah, I know. But honestly, man, Teddy Roosevelt was an interesting person. Well, but I like the walrus mustache. It was a good touch. But also, hang on. Also, yeah, that laughing picture. Like, I don't know why they always pick that one. Like,
and also, why do they always put that caption below? You know what caption I'm talking about? You know, every time this picture pops up. Do you know the caption?
No.
I hate to repeat it, but I'm going to say it because it's kind of foul. But it's like every time you see this picture, there's like "What's up, bitches" or something
Dude,
like that.
that's the
below it. They
epic
always
rap
put that
battles of
below it.
history. They were the ones who did that, you know?
Oh, okay. Everybody's copied that ever since. I'm like, why? I'm like, what's the like message behind that? I'm like, I don't understand. This is a historical photo. I don't understand the message.
So way back in the day, back like when YouTube was young, epic rap battles of history would do these updates on their channel about incoming music projects or rap battles that they were going to do, and they would use this picture of Teddy, and they would do that little Photoshop thing where you would remove the bottom part of the mouth and make a different layer so they could move it around and make it look like he was talking. And every time the video would begin, Teddy Roosevelt in the video would go, "What's up, bitches?" And then he would begin like the little like summary of like the epic rap battles that were coming out. That's where that came from. Like that whole like quote is literally because of that.
Okay, that makes a whole lot of sense, but it wasn't making sense why people were putting that below it, so that makes sense.
Dude, honestly, man, this picture goes hard of Teddy Roosevelt at Yosemite Falls.
It really does, really.
Man, he was out there styling on him. Like he said, man, not only is the drip going down the waterfall, but I'm dripping. he was like, man, I'm out here being a real one. But still, Teddy Roosevelt, absolutely incredible. I think this was actually a photograph that was taken, I think, when he was the police commissioner of the city of New York, because this was way back when he was younger. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that well, or at least give you a little bit of info about different kinds of pictures and stuff. Oh, look, there's another picture of him laughing. Dude, they love to take pictures of him laughing for some reason. I don't know.
Man, he was a chuckler. I tell you what.
Man,
the more politicians should laugh like that these days. Well, he said when he was laughing, though, he was laughing because things were going generally okay. The politicians these days laugh because they're fleecing it all the way to the bank. So they're laughing because it's going all the way to the bank.
Dude, I liked it when he was running for re-election. I think it was in 1912. I think, if I'm remembering that right. Or it was 1914. I'm not entirely sure. But he was running for re-election, and he got shot. Many of y'all will know the story. And the bullet actually didn't puncture into his flesh because it got stopped by a glass case and something else in his pocket. I believe it was his speech. And so he got shot, and he went, ugh. And then he was like, bring that man up here, like the guy who shot him. So they brought him up there, and he literally just said, why'd you do it? And then the guy said like some crazy stuff, and he just said, okay, whatever, take him away. And then they took him away. So then he got up on stage, showed his bloody shirt, and said, folks, I just got shot, but I'm not stopping this speech. And then he went on to give like a 2-hour-long speech at this rally. It was legendary that what this guy was able to do. Like, I don't think anyone else would do that in his kind of a situation, because the guy legitimately got shot, was bleeding pretty heavily, and refused to go to the hospital. Everyone was like, you need to go to the hospital. You're actually bleeding pretty well. He's like, no, I'm just gonna, I'm gonna get up here and give a speech. Gave a 2-hour-long speech, and then went to the hospital, and then that's when he went to the recovery, and then he said, nothing can stop a bull moose, and then, that's when the whole bull moose thing came into being. But still, what a legend. The guy was just legendary in every way. But moving on from that, and out of that little clip, it's now time for us to move on into the next bit of Location Unknown news, where we got to see the motor. That is an electric
motor. Jeez, man, what is that from?
That's from a Garand 2, or the Russian version of the Shahed 136.
That's huge.
That's freaking massive, man. I didn't even know they made electric motors like that big. I always seen the little ones. The ones that...
Well, yeah, also, what battery's powering that? Because, I thought you had to have, a whole, literally connected to the grid to power a motor that big.
I have no clue. Honestly, I just don't know. I have no clue what powers a motor like that. I have never seen a motor that big, and that's why I literally captioned this post as the motor. That was it, because I've never seen a electric motor like this of this size in any kind of an aircraft of any sort. But moving on from that and into the next clip, we were also able to see a brand new Russian MTLB fitted out with all the trimmings. That thing sounds like it's already falling apart.
Sounds like a barn.
Dude, he closed the door and the whole MTLB almost shook apart. It went... It's like...
Сила мысли инженерной.
The
power of thought and engineering. Clearly not strong.
Not a Russian strong suit at all. I don't believe that we would really want trade relations with them, because we give them a high quality good, they give us the worst trash ever possible. It's a lose-lose. But we also did get to see the Russian casualty report, which was pretty decent today.
Wow, they went down to 0 Bobcats, man. They're the Bobcats. But tell us more.
Do you just turn Swedish or something? You said, the Bobcats do, or something like that. I was like, what?
Man, I didn't have anything left to say. I just ran out of breath and air and just came to a stop.
Man, you're like a pipe organ when they turn off the air compressor, man, where it's like, doo-doo-doo-doo-hoo. You know, something like that. It's like, oh, it's like, they ran out of air. But nevertheless, Miss Decent Keeper of the Records did throw in the summary of the record keeping for the casualty report today. 63 artillery systems lost is the 11th highest day lost, tied with September 22nd of 2024. 6 anti-aircraft systems is tied with several days as the 5th highest loss, meaning that today was a very good day in the anti-aircraft losses. 160 drones is the 6th highest loss, and 136 vehicles ranks as the 15th highest loss. So today was actually a pretty good day in a lot of metrics. But moving on into the casualty report, we were able to see that 1,190 Russian soldiers were wounded and killed in the past 24 hours, along with 14 APCs, 136 supply trucks, 14 drones, 14 tanks, 63 artillery pieces, 160 drones, 3 MLRSs, 6 anti-aircraft warfare systems, and nothing else. But still, today was a very good day in terms of the losses. But moving on from that and into the northern front near to Kupiansk, we were able to see the Russian forces getting slammed with some trap beats hitting in the background as the 3rd Brigade...
Like house music.
House music?
Yeah, house. It's house.
Like house as in H-A-U-S?
No, that's German. I'm talking about house music.
What in the world was in there?
House music.
Apparently. Like, it was smoky, whatever it was. Well, that was the end of that clip, but I think they got him. I'm pretty sure they got him with the giant puff of smoke. They made him disappear. But moving on from that and down to Kremenna, we also got to see Ukrainian ground drone firing a miniature MLRS at the Russians. We've never seen anything like this used before, but it's right down there where the mouse cursor is, and we now see it firing the rockets right into the Russian position in the tree line. I have never seen anything like this in use before. Like, quite truly, this is an innovation right here. It's like a bombard, nearly.
It is fascinating. Also, Activista said, I thought it was funny. I'm glad you found it funny. I'm glad you did.
I thank you. I thank you for that.
Please laugh or clap.
Please laugh. Huh? Please laugh. Man.
That guy's in the corner somewhere right now going, I told you so.
He's sitting around with a sturdy supporters. Like, I told you. Like, it's like, man, dude, I felt so sorry for that guy. That guy would have to go around to restaurants with like 10 people in them. It's like, man, it's like, I'm sorry, man. But anyways, moving on from that, we did get to see right here a Ukrainian F-16 in the skies. What a sight. I really like to see him with the Ukrainian Trident on him and everything. It's an incredibly cool sight. And then we just got this picture of the sky at the end. Really neat. But moving on from that and behind the lines, we were able to hear that some Koksan batteries were knocked out by the Ukrainians today, although we don't have any video or picture evidence to confirm that, at least at the moment. Moving on from that and into the Toretsk area, we also got to see the Ukrainian Armed Forces defending Toretsk again. When you see that their vision is red at this point, they are seeing red.
Oh, look at that. That's a snoot. That thing's got a suppressor.
Man, that thing's got the droop snoot. And we see here that they're setting up the rifle. They were popping off some shots. Sadly, we can't play the audio. But that's an AK, I can promise you all that. One of the few times we see AKs being used these days.
Look at that red dot he's got.
Dude, that red dot's going to blind you. Like, it's like,
Yeah, really.
I can't see. Like,
turn down the brightness in that thing. I think it's set too high.
Dude, I think that guy might be like, might have a cataract or something like that. If he's got the red dot up that bright, it's like, can he not see it? It's like, dude, that's like giving yourself LASIK eye surgery to look down that optic.
I tell you. This wallpaper right here, though, goodness. That's like at my grandmother's house.
Man, that might be a crime against design. Like, it's like interior design. Like,
I gotta get one of those wallpaper ripper things and rip the sheetrock down with it.
man, get it down to the basic timber frame. Well, actually, in these buildings, it would be a brick frame.
Oh, look at that chair. That's oddly placed right there. Kind of spooky. I was still like somebody should be sitting there.
It's like a liminal space kind of a deal. It's like, what is going
Yeah.
on?
It must feel surreal, like even though this is the home of the Ukrainians, for them to actually like wander around like these destroyed buildings, like they're on Call of Duty in real life. It must feel surreal, like actually sitting in that or walking around that environment.
I would bet you it probably is. Also, by the way, we did get to see the Mandalorian Brigade, which is what I'm just going to call these folks, ended up destroying a Russian ground drone with a FPV drone today. Take a look at this. There's the little Russian ground drone down there. And we can see them now blowing it up. Oh my god! It was carrying explosives, I suppose, because it looks like there's nothing left. There was nothing left. There was just a crater, and that was it. So it was carrying explosives, and it got detonated. So, sad. Moving on from that and down to Velika Novosilka, we also got to see a Russian assault getting blasted. When you see here, the 110th is watching as the Russians make their way up to the Ukrainian lines. Oh, in a minute, they're about to be regretting this one. We now see the Ukrainians knocking out their first APC, an MTLB. Poop! And there it went right there. Look at that. They hit it. And here comes another one. I don't know what was in that vehicle, but it looks like it just went nuclear.
It went kaboom.
Destroyed is what that says in Ukrainian. Now on to the next one, a BMP.
Ugly.
Here we can see the Ukrainians feasting on their natural diet of BMPs and MTLBs. These creatures roam the fields of Ukraine, largely prey to the Ukrainian predators. The Ukrainians bring in the FPVs and consume the armored personnel carriers as they make their daring daunt across the battlefield, hoping to find a good mate on the other side. We can see that this Russian APC is smoking, a sign of warnings to others of its species that they are to run and hide. We can see one of the larger of the Russian species, a Russian shed, sitting in the fields as it's about to be ravaged by the hungry Ukrainian brood. We can see that the Ukrainians continue to take chunks out of the young Russian MBTs, as they are no longer able to defend themselves and are largely hopeless against the Ukrainian onslaught.
And these just aren't chunks. These are big chunks. The biggest chunks the world's ever seen. Like fire and fury, but chunk.
Giant chunk. Double chunk chocolate cookie from Costco.
Kind of like a big chunk. Like minerals from Ukraine. Chunk of mineral. 500 billion. We'll have that now.
I bet you we're probably going to get it in one giant nugget. It's going to be like a freaking size in New York City. Like it's like, we're just going to...
They've never mined a chunk quite like that chunk.
We're going to have to get a bigger U-Haul to bring it to America. Oh, man. I don't know how they're going to meld all the lithium and stuff together, but we're going to put it in a big chunk. It's going to be like a giant ball of shit, and then we're going to load it on a boat and bring it to America. 500 billion, really a lot of money. But moving on from that and on out of that area, we're now moving on down into Novokakhovka, where we got to see the Ukrainians hitting some Russian forces down E.
Oh, look, a commie block.
Oh, wait a minute, hang on, man. I got to read this one from Smog in that voice. They stole that electric motor from a Prius or a Tesla. Elon is pissed. He's not...
Oh, that's an Elon. That's an Elon. Tough crowd.
KY guy said Enforcer needs to quit doing this and get into just doing imitations. LMAO, by far one of the best I've seen on spot on everyone. Thank you so much. It's great to know. Everyone walks in and they go, wow, that's a great impersonation. And I always say, it's a wonderful one. It's a greatest one. There's no way that it can be beat. I'm trending in the ratings. It's just wonderful and beautiful.
I think that we should Doge.
Whoa, big crowd.
Lay off the ketamine for goodness sake.
Throw up that documentary clip. Ketamine, it is a horse tranquilizer. It's like,
Man, for real.
Moving on from that, we also got to see a Ukrainian long-range drone trying to hit Slovyansk na Kubani today. And here's the clip.
Вот, слышу, жужжит на улице. Охренеть, вот он полетел. Во, летит. Во, взорвал.
It didn't make it through, unfortunately.
Нихуя себе!
Нихуя!
Охуеть! Фу, сука! О, вот это я поймал кадр, блядь.
Unfortunately, that one didn't make it through, but, it tried, and it's the effort that counts, because not all of them can make it through. But moving on from that and on into our next little clip, we also got to see that the air defense at Odessa was wilding last night as it shot down 16 Shaheds with rap beats in the background. There goes one. There goes another.
That's like a Pac-Man little thing coming down on it.
And Paul Camperlast, are you playing the invisible accordion when doing that voice? And the answer is yes. I do the little fingers, and I flip them around where it's the one finger's pointed and all the other fingers are pointed up, and we're doing the OK sign, and then I also move them all around. You have to do it when doing that voice. You just have to. And I kind of do that with everyone. You have to do the personality. You have to do it all. You have to do all of the little hand gestures, like when I do Rodney Dangerfield. Oh man, I'm telling you. I actually move my hand around like the ring of the neck in my shirt like he did, like readjusting the tie and everything, because whenever I do the voices, I'm actually doing all of the physical impersonation as well at the same time. It's just that y'all can't see that, but I actually do that because it helps me to do the voices and kind of like get in the mindset.
I'm telling you, the voices are getting crazy. I'm telling you, they're turning the country into a circus. It's a circus.
Dude, that's perfect. Oh my god. Moving on from that, and on into Kyiv, it is time for us to finally get to the speech for President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Dude, that was literally the craziest thing. You literally got into that. Perfect. That was crazy. Dude, he did it perfect, Seinfeld. That's a 10 out of 10 in my books. But anyways, here's the speech from Zelenskyy. Speech!
Бажаю здоров'я, шановні українці і українки. Дуже довгий день сьогодні. Провів ставку, доповіді військових були, наші позиції на фронті, ситуація з постачанням, контракти, пакети зброї. Робота триває. Я дякую кожному з наших партнерів, які розуміють, що потрібні сильні позиції і на фронті, щоб захищати людей, і в дипломатії мають значення і сила, і правда. Доповіді були щодо діпстрайків по російських військових об'єктах і по інфраструктурі Росії, що обслуговує війну. На кожні 2 вкладених долари в нашу далекобійність ми отримуємо вже майже $10 російських збитків. Це потрібна динаміка. Росія повинна відчувати ціну війни, щоб дійсно хотіти миру. Окремо, сьогодні суттєві речі доповідав керівник служби зовнішньої розвідки. Сьогодні ж було багато нашої міжнародної роботи. Генерал Келох, зустріч, яка відновлює надію, нам потрібні сильні угоди з Америкою, угоди, які справді спрацюють. Я доручив працювати швидко і дуже виважено. Економіка і безпека завжди мають йти поруч, і деталі угод мають значення. Чим краще прописані деталі, тим більше результат. Обговорили із генералом Келохом фронт, необхідність.
Also, really quickly, everyone, I just noticed that the subtitles are kind of covered.
Звільнити всіх наших полонених.
Never mind, sorry, everyone. I thought that was a little problem there, but never mind. We're going to continue the speech.
Які утримуються в Росії, а також необхідність надійної і чіткої системи гарантій безпеки, щоб війна більше не повернулась і щоб росіяни не ламали життя. Мир потрібен всім нам. Україні, Європі, Америці, всім у світі. Говорив щойно з президентом Макроном. Ми скоординували наші позиції, ми обговорили подальші кроки, зокрема погляди на гарантії безпеки. Говорив з прем'єр-міністром Данії. І ми цінуємо, що Метте і народ Данії відчувають, чого ми прагнемо. Говорив з прем'єр-міністром Норвегії. І не тільки про наші двосторонні відносини, але й про майбутнє Європи, про енергетичну безпеку. Говорив з президентом Фінляндії. Є хороші, важливі пропозиції. Ми обмінялись нашими поглядами на розвиток ситуації. Говорив з прем'єр-міністром Канади. Поінформував про те, що відбувається зараз. Ми обговорили перспективи. Обговорили, зокрема, перспективи в G7. Говорив сьогодні з президентом Південно-Африканської Республіки. І я вдячний за підтримку нашого суверенітету і за позицію щодо того, що перемовний процес має бути інклюзивним. Мир – це завжди спільна справа, і тим більше мир, який ми маємо залишити всім наступним поколінням. Я дякую всім за допомогу і за відчуття єдності, яка зараз так само важлива, як і в 22-му році. Я пишаюся нашими людьми, пишаюся всіма, хто б'ється, хто допомагає, хто вірить, що в війнах не має перемагати зло. І сьогоднішній день я почав зі вшанування пам'яті українців, які загинули 11 років тому. Вже 11 років. Герої Небесної Сотні, Герої Гідності, 11 років. Тому в цей день почались і перші загарбницькі кроки Росії щодо нашого Криму. Україна зробить все для завершення цієї війни, все необхідне. І нам потрібен достойний мир, гідний народу, який так сміливо захищає себе. Пишаюся вами, українці, і я бачу, як ви захищаєте правду. І це дуже важливо. Я дякую вам. Дякую за підтримку. Слава Україні!
And Slava. And with that, that is the end of the speech from President Volodymyr Zelenskyy here on day 1093 of the war in Ukraine. And that's going to be moving us on into the next segment of this stream. Y'all might be shocked to know what it is, but I'm about to blow your minds. We get to talk to all of y'all. Whoa! It's not like we've done that for 1,100 days nearly. Holy moly! But nevertheless, we're going to be talking to each and every one of you, hopefully, as much as we can, here within the next hour and a half or 2 hours. It really depends on how this goes. But nevertheless, Matthew, what do we got? Take it away, please.
All right, so it's now time for the final question segment of the night, the most highly anticipated segment of the stream. And of course, I have to say it, we have no more polls left to address. And even though we love the polls very much and very dearly, and the polls are very, very well equipped and well armed, the polls will sadly have to take a back seat for just a moment to refresh out. But anyways, we are now moving on here to our Super Chat questions once again. And also, before we move on to that, would you all like to see a top secret image from a secretive spacecraft that the DoD actually puts out? You want to see that real quick? And for us to go check out our Twitter, show them that secret picture real quick.
Now, I was looking at the city of Poznan, though, man. It's Polish.
Poznan, we've seen that before, but we haven't seen this secret picture from the X-37, though. We got to see that.
What? Wait a minute, the X-37? Hold up, we got to go take a look at that right now. Hold up, everyone. Wait just a minute. Oh, man, I'm telling you. Let's see here. Holy moly. Wait a minute. That looks fake to me.
It's real. It's from the X-37. It's a reusable robotic spacecraft that's operated by the United States Air Force. In fact, I think it might be operated by the Space Force now, but it's very secretive and it's robotic. And I don't know what it's doing, like at this angle of the Earth, but whatever it's doing, it's out there.
I'm not going to lie. I don't think this is real, Matthew, because the view from the ISS view of Earth is not like that at all. Like this is what the Earth looks like on the International Space Station, which I believe is 250 miles above the surface of the Earth. So this thing would literally have to be at the moon. Like that looks like the blue marble picture. Let me go get it. The original blue marble. Let's see. Hold up. Let me go get the picture of Earth from the moon. Like, that almost looks like that. Like, this thing would have to be at the moon, practically, to have a picture like that.
But this allegedly came off the DoD's website.
Are you sure?
I'll go double check. Let me go look. X-37 photo, DoD. Let's see here. Let's see here. Let me go look.
Because, I mean, this thing is in such a far-out orbit, it would have practically had to have escaped Earth's gravitational pull at this point to be way out here. I mean, this thing would practically have already been slingshotted towards the moon or be at the moon, because it looks to be so freaking far away. You know, I don't know.
I mean, I'll be honest with you, I'm not seeing it right off the bat, but they allegedly just released it. I haven't seen that account on Twitter put out a fake news before, so I would doubt it's fake. I would assume it's real.
Let me go see U.S. Space Force photo gallery. Let's see here. Photos. Let's see here. If they quietly release this, keyword X-37. So this is a mock-up. And these are the only pictures on the Space Force's website of the X-37. These are the only ones. And this graphical rendition, artist rendering of the X-37B conducting an aerobraking maneuver using the Earth's atmosphere. So I am not entirely sure if that picture is real.
I'll be honest with you. I'm starting to agree with you on that because I'm looking at all the Space Force's websites and stuff here, and I don't see any picture that matches that one. But I'll admit that's the first time I've ever seen something. We don't know if it's fake or not. It looks to be maybe fake because I can't find it on the Space Force's site. But I think you might be right.
Also, Matthew, when in the world did anyone in the space program start using exposed bolts and washers on anything that would be exposed to open space? Like, that doesn't look like anything on the external of the X-37 to use, you know, bolts and washers. Like, I think this might be a fake picture.
I think it might be fake.
Also, why in the world are these? They're like these striations in the picture where it looks like it was taken off of a computer screen.
That could be the top secret camera.
That doesn't make any sense. Like, I'm not gonna lie, this isn't really making that much sense. I think that this might be a bit of a farce. Like, at least in my opinion. Let me take this off.
Let me unpost it. Let
me look around here really quickly. Let's see here. Yeah, just don't. Nah, I don't know about this one, man, because it's seeming a little bit odd to me. It's really seeming a little bit odd, you know. Like, it's just kind of an odd thing. But the Space Force does have a pretty cool deal going on, as a matter of fact. You know, if you.
Oh, wait a minute! No! It's real. It's real. I just found it on DVids, on the Department of Defense's website. Let's see here. Let's see. I'll send it over to you. No, it's actually real. It's real. It's real.
It's real.
Take it back.
It's real. Well, so why? So like, any explanation that they gave as to why it's in an orbit like that?
So let me send you the link here. So it says an X-37B onboard camera used to ensure the health of the vehicle captures an image of Earth while conducting experiments in a highly elliptical orbit in 2024, which is last year. And the vehicle executed a series of first-of-its-kind maneuvers called aerobraking to safely change its orbit using minimal fuel. So no, it's actually real. Like, that's crazy though. Like, it's really, really far out. That thing is.
Oh, so wait a minute. Do we still have that on Twitter?
Let me go repost it.
Twitter. Let's go take a gander at that again. I was a doubter, but now I'm a believer. Whoa. That's real. So apparently inside the X-37 somewhere, there's exposed bolts and washers. Like, right there. Like, you can see them.
Well, you can't bash it too much because whatever the thing is, because we don't know the capabilities of it because it's very classified, but this thing apparently has some serious capabilities to go out this far robotically and maneuver itself and then come back. It's actually pretty capable.
Well, actually, what this thing is doing is it's using Earth's gravity, because an elliptical orbit isn't a, say, a circular orbit where it's literally just orbiting pretty much in a circle above the surface of the Earth. Elliptical means it's almost like an oval shape. So what the mission is, let me go see if I can show an elliptical orbit. Here we go. So this is an elliptical orbit. This is a circular orbit. As you can see in the dotted blue line, this is an elliptical orbit. So this would have probably been taken at the apogee, at its farthest away in the elliptical orbit. But the aerobraking maneuver, to explain that to everyone and how that works, is that when the X-37 is returning back towards Earth, it actually skims the Earth's atmosphere a bit. Produces a decent amount of friction and also greatly reduces the inertia of the vehicle, but simultaneously, that kind of friction in a certain way can be used to augment the shape of the orbit and also allow for the craft to maneuver while largely using almost no fuel at all. That's largely how this mission was working, apparently. And so this picture was apparently taken all the way out at its apogee when it was the farthest away, and then it was mostly going to start returning due to Earth's gravitational pull back towards the Earth. So at this point in its flight, it's probably going the slowest because, once again, its actual escape inertia is decreasing, and it's going to start moving back towards being pulled towards the Earth because of its gravity. But still, a fairly...
Isn't that crazy though? Like it actually, it's so such an odd looking picture. It does look kind of fake, to be perfectly honest. Like when you look at it, that's just like the pictures from space like this. It's just hard to believe. It's like everything that is going on that we cover is on that blue ball right there, and it's literally just looking at it from outside like that. It's crazy.
Also, someone said you cannot judge distance unless you know the focal length of the lens. No, you can judge distance because the lens can be whatever the hell it is, but if you're far enough away from the Earth, it's far away. Like, it looks like that. The focal point of the lens is not going to be able to get the full Earth in frame, because if you look at any pictures, let's see, Earth from the ISS, this is, no matter what your focal length on a lens is, this is what Earth looks like from the International Space Station. Which is actually kind of crazy that it just looks like that, like that's an actual picture.
Can you imagine what the capabilities are that we do not know about? Because that's something that just came out today, like showing that in that elliptical orbit like that. I can only imagine, what we probably have that we're not aware of. In the
Russia is, it might beat us militarily. Like they're producing quote unquote stealth aircraft that are as stealthy as an F-15, and we got a space vehicle that pretty much traveled all the way to the moon in an elliptical orbit and then came back and is completely remote controlled. It's like, I'll be honest, like I think we got everyone beat for the large part on the whole technological advantage side of things at this point, just from this alone.
China's out there, I'm sure.
Oh, nah, man. China's not even close, man. They probably have the Baofeng Xinjiang Type 37 that can probably do this, but also explode at the apogee. Probably, I would honestly expect they probably don't have anything close to this, or if they do, it's propaganda, I would assume. But nevertheless, man, the pictures of Earth from the ISS are incredibly interesting. Like, look at that. That's Spain right there.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it's just wild to see. Like, look at this. Look at this right here. If it loads, like if it's not loading, it's not loading at all. But look at this. That's Denmark right there. That's Sweden and Norway at night, and you can see the Aurora Borealis up there further on up in the Arctic Circle.
Man, that's crazy. It's green. It's green.
Bro, it's green. It's freaking green. And look at this. Look at this. That's the Sahara Desert. I mean, crazy, right? Like crazy. Like that's crazy right there. And here's an artistic rendering of the ISS. That's not a real picture. This I believe actually is a real picture of the ISS. And notice how the Earth looks flat. It's a conspiracy. I'm just kidding. Like I'm just playing. You can clearly see. Let's see here. The curvature of the Earth right here. And this is over the Mediterranean. They're over North Africa. There's Corsica up there, and I forgot what this island's name is. What in the world's the name of that island? Sardinia. There's Sardinia and Corsica further up. And you can see both of those, and then you can see the French Riviera, the Italian coastline, and then also Sicily right there. Pretty cool, honestly, to think that they're that far off the surface of the planet, but that's what 250 miles up looks like right there. But anyways, enough of that. Y'all weren't here for this. Y'all were here for me to talk to y'all, not look at all these pictures. So, Matthew, what do we got? What do we got, Matthew? Come on, hit me with it. Hit me.
All right, so jumping back into our Super Chat segment here, our first one of the last segment is going to go to Philip Fixes, LSA, a longtime channel legend. And thank you very much, Philip Fixes, for that support. And he puts in a very generous $50 donation. And thank you so much, Philip, for the massive support. And Philip says, from swatting strikes to Moscow Mike, marmots to sockeyed salmons, schisms and discord divisions, the Leaf Spring Army stands strong. And with a laugh and a hope, We march on, armed with the ideals of freedom and accountability, and a beacon of truth in the dark.
I like that, Philip Fixes, and also that callback and a whole bunch of things that honestly were so long ago, most people probably don't even know what they are. But that is actually pretty wild to know that you remembered all that. And I gotta thank you for the very nice support and the poem. I have to say that's a pretty good one. And thank you once again for helping this channel to keep on running, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to keep this channel running, and we wouldn't be able to make this thing possible. So a huge thanks to you so much once again, and we are on to the next one.
And our next super chat goes to Live Laugh Toaster Bath, another channel legend who puts in a $31 donation. And thank you very much, Live Laugh Toaster Bath. They said, good evening, Enforcers, and please don't be discouraged by the ignorant few. What you guys do matters. And take one from the chat, please, an LSA. And we will not stand down, we will not be defeated, and Slava Ukraine.
And Ram Slava. And that's what we've committed to. That's why I'm so happy and energetic tonight. Because I went, you know what? I'm not going to be beat down by people anymore in the chat. We're just going to ban them. like that's what I told Andy in the background. I was like, we're not dealing with that anymore. I was like, I'm not going to be beholden to a small group of people in the live chat, like 3 or 4 people that run their mouths like clowns. Like if people want to do that, they get banned now. And then we're just going to run the channel the way we've always run it. And we're not going to be beaten down by just a small handful of people every night. So I can promise you that's not really going to be impacting the channel all too much from this point forward. We always have to relearn that every few months. I don't know why, but hopefully we will not have to relearn it this time, and we'll just keep doing what we do, and people will like it or they won't, and the channel will live or it'll die. But nevertheless, thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this thing possible. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and excuse me, our next one here goes to, also we need to get one from the live chat for Live Laugh Toaster Bath, by the way, and this one is going to go to Glock Glock, who's there, who says, has Ramzan Kadyrov disappeared from Chechnya?
I don't know. We haven't really heard a lot about him, but he's also just kind of an inconsequential person at this point in the war, so it might just be because there's really nothing going on with him to even talk about to know if he's around or not, Don. And so with that, Don, thank you once again, Don, for the support, Don, and helping this channel to keep on running, Don, because if it wasn't for folks like you, Don, we wouldn't be able to keep this channel running, Don. And also, I see so many people asking questions. What is the universe? Is it flat? Is it round? What is it? I believe it's spherical, because if everything else is spherical in space, you know, like drops of water or planets or stars, everything's spherical. I believe the universe must be a sphere. Like, it just makes sense that if everything in the vacuum of space somehow always forms into a sphere, then the universe must also be a sphere as well. That is literally the only reasoning that I have to believe in that, is that everything else is spherical, so the universe also has to be spherical as well. It would just largely keep a continuum going. Instead of it being flat or square or round, it's spherical. So with that, I hope that weighs in my 2 cents on what I would believe the universe most likely looks like if we knew the outer edges of it, which we really still don't even know. And also the universe is apparently still constantly expanding. And also on top of that, considering that it's expanding, there was some sort of a focal point that it began at, going off of that. So it would be reasonable to assume that it expands equally on all sides, so it would still be spherical. But anyways, with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one goes to Greg Thornton, who puts in a $20 donation, and thank you very much, Greg, for the support as well. He said, happy belated birthday, have a drink on me, and Slava LSA.
Hey, and thank you so much for your support and helping this channel to keep on running. And of course, it's wonderful to have you here, and I gotta thank you so much for giving support and making this channel possible and helping it to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one goes to LSA Sergeant Figment, who also puts in a 20. And thank you very much, Sarge, for that support and helping to keep it running. He said, LSA, hit the like button. That's an order. And also, keep up the great work, boys. And can you discuss what the U.S. support ending would look like and how the EU would pick up slack? Because wouldn't that cause EU troop deployment to be more likely?
That's a very in-depth question. I think we're going to have to take that one part at a time. So can we start with the first part?
They said, can you discuss what the U.S. support ending would look like and how the EU would pick up the slack?
The U.S. funding support ending would just end. That's what that would look like. No more money to Ukraine or really any military equipment, most importantly, because that's mostly what we send to them. We rarely ever send hard cash. What that also would look like on the European end is that the Europeans would most likely just start to pump out support packages to Ukraine through the wazoo and just largely support it on their own. It wouldn't really be that in-depth or intricate looking to us out here on the news covering in, because it would just look like U.S. money no longer there, European money doubles in amount to Ukraine. That's most likely what it end up looking like. And so with that, I hope that does address that somewhat well. Also, someone said, no, that's not true. It's flat. Like maybe the universe is flat because the solar system's flat. That is not true. Let's see. True solar system map. Let me go see if I can get this. Let's see here. It's hard to get this because the way it's always shown. Yeah, I'll show it to y'all. Let's see here. The way it is always shown in most maps is that the solar system looks like this. And this is markedly untrue, because some orbits are completely different than others. And I'm going to see if I can try and find this for y'all. Let's see. Solar system map. Let's see. 3D. Let me go see if I can get like a kind of like a concept map that's a real one. Because not all the orbits are on a flat plane. Some of them actually are kind of canted at an angle. So the universe is actually not flat. There's actually depth to it. I just wish I could find a better representation of that, because it almost seems as though there is no good representation of that at all. Like, this doesn't even show it that well. Like, if you showed the solar system on a supposed flat plane, there are orbits that are not perfectly flat. They actually are at a pretty considerable angle compared to the orbit of the Earth around the sun. And I wish, dagnabbit, I wish I could find this because, okay, so here we go. This is maybe a bit of a better one, but it does also show that Pluto, which is one of the, well, some people argue that's not even a planet. I grew up being told it was a planet. It's still a planet in my book, because, you know, I'm not going to just change that because they said it's too small. It's like, well, it's the biggest thing out there, so to me, counts as a planet. Why not? But nevertheless, Pluto has an incredibly angled orbit compared to most other planets, and most other planets also have somewhat odd orbits as well, where they're not perfectly flat, you know, compared to the Earth, and they're more so angular. So for that reason, the Earth isn't, the solar system is not perfectly flat either, and could generally be described as not really spherical, but largely spherical, in sort of a sense. But the universe could not be flat, because it would make no sense to say that the universe is constantly expanding, but somehow that energy is only being directed along a flat plane outwards in every direction, because what would be the confining force that would stop the universe from expanding universally in all directions and creating a perfect sphere? Like, there would have to be some sort of a...
But the universe is expanding into what?
Into the void. Apparently.
The void of what?
Of nothingness. I mean, there's just apparently a void beyond the universe. Like, we really don't know what's beyond the universe, so I would largely assume it's probably just an endless void out there of nothingness.
So it's just expanding into expanding.
It's just expanding into the great void of the unknown. I mean, we don't really know what's beyond the universe. I think we've seen on some telescope what looks like it may be the edge of the universe, but we're not entirely sure. And we can't really see beyond the edge of the universe, so as far as we know, it's just a void out there, and the universe is expanding into what practically, there's just nothing out there. Like, it's, like, to explain it, it's space without anything in it. Like, it's just nothing out there.
Well, that's concerning, because if we're having overcrowding, if there's like an edge to the universe or something like that, we need to like stop this crowding. It's getting too crowded.
What the hell are you talking about, Jesse? What are you talking about? But let's see. I see some people. Let's see. There's more universes. I don't know about that one. Like, we can only observe the observable, and, you know, we can only see one universe, so I would largely assume that there's only one.
The multiverse theory, it has science behind it. It's not just conspiracy theory, by the way. They think there's multiple different universes or dimensions or whatever you want to call it. They think that there is, and they think that the math backs that up, but nobody knows.
But also at the same time, I can't see an argument of people saying that the universe cannot be spherical, because there are there are super galaxy clusters where the density is completely disproportionate to other areas. So maybe that actually does make an argument that it cannot be perfectly spherical because there is an imperfect distribution of density in the universe throughout different areas. So maybe there is a good point to say that it isn't perfectly spherical, but I still have a feeling that there is height, width, and depth to it all together. Instead of there just being width and length, there's got to be also some height to it as well. It has to be something that is on multiple dimensions instead of just two. Because it wouldn't really make sense. What would be the confining force to make it perfectly flat? You know, like where it really doesn't have that much height at all and it's just spread out incredibly wide. I don't really know how that would make a lot of sense. Let's see if we can actually find a map of the known universe.
That's you're describing 3 dimensions. They're saying that there can be a 4th dimension.
So it is spherical.
The universe.
Apparently so, because this is a map of the observable universe limit, which goes out to 1 billion light years. And apparently from what satellites have observed, because this is a map of all of the clusters. So what is crazy about the universe is that the universe is made up of a practically infinite amount of galaxies. Like, we really cannot measure the exact number. But you can see the galaxy clusters, which are the very bright white areas. And then there's other areas where, density-wise, there's almost a void, and there's practically no galaxies or anything within those voids. But as far as we can tell, at least based off of this map, which was published by who? Let's see here. Simulate, who in the world
Andrew
made
Colvin
this?
own work.
Let's see. The scale, such as, it's marked as center. So let's see here. Every location has its own observable universe, which may or may not overlap with the one centered on. What the hell does that mean? Let's see.
Could you imagine the computer that's required to run that simulation?
Jeez. Dude, that would be insane. Like, that actually would be insane. But
It's infinite.
But what is crazy, like, just to let you all know, if you shined the most powerful flashlight on Earth, or a laser, say, the light energy would take 1 billion years to reach the observable edge of the universe. An entire billion years. Because light has a definitive rate of travel. So for it to be able to travel 1 light year, light has, of course, moved at its speed, which is practically instantaneous here on Earth. But over the course of time, it takes an entire year for it to move almost a non-observable fraction on a universal scale. So it would take 1 billion light years for it to make it to the edge of the universe, meaning that it is very highly plausible that outside of our observable limit, that there is some form of life out there, because it's an infinitesimally large space. There has to be life out there that exists somewhere else. I would assume that it's probably so far away, though, we'll never run into it, and they'll never run into us, and probably one or the other will be extinct before the other finds it, and any trace of it will be practically non-existent by that point, just because of the size of the universe itself. But
I just want to know, how do we observe the universe's limit? Like, I know they're saying satellites, was like, we observe the universe's limit. It's like, I'm not saying they're lying, but I have a hard time believing that.
Well, this is as far as the telescopes can see. Like, there's probably more beyond that. It's just that we cannot see it. This is why it's the observable universe limit, because there probably is a lot more that exists well beyond this. It's just that we can't see it.
Yeah, honestly, when you look at it from a perspective like this and you think about it like really in depth, it's hard to believe that Earth is the only planet with life on it. Like, I'm going to be totally honest. It's really hard to think that. It's like, with all the infinite possibilities of planets, living conditions, the universe being probably infinitely large, not just the observable limit here. It's like, how can there not be? Like, the odds would support another group of life. That's what the odds would support.
Yeah, I would largely agree with that. And also, something else, I think this is, let's see, every location in the universe has its own observable universe, which may or may not overlap with the one centered on Earth. Because right now, I guess, this is what I'm trying to interpret here. And someone said, you obviously don't know a lot about space. Well, duh. It's not like I'm an astrophysicist or anything like that. But This is the universe as seen from the Milky Way, specifically from our vantage point here on Earth. So this is what we can observably see. So if you were to be on the very edge, 1 billion light years away from what we see as the observable universe right here, and you were living on a planet there, and you tried to observe the universe, there could be an entire universe off over here to the left in what we would see as the void that exists for them that we do not see. That's what that's largely saying at the end, I'm supposing. Might be wrong on that, but that's largely what I'd assume. But it is still crazy, man, to think that it is 93 billion light years across.
Yeah, that's crazy, honestly. Like, it's hard to fathom that. And it's also hard to fathom out of all of this stuff right here and everything in the universe that we're here on one little tiny dot fighting with one nutcase trying to take over Ukraine. Like, it's just insane to
Yeah.
think that out of all that stuff, out of all this infinite wonders of the universe, we're stuck here on one blue dot with one country trying to kill everybody.
Yeah, I mean, it's a wild thing when you think about it, man. It's like, out of all of this space, out of this entire universe, it's 93 billion light years across. Well, actually, crazily enough, man, I just realized that doesn't mean that it takes 1 billion light years for light to reach from the Milky Way out here. That's actually just 1 billion light years for it to reach from there to here.
Yeah, that's true.
So it would actually take 1 billion light years for light to reach from the very center of the universe, at least from what we observe, from where we are right here in the Milky Way, to reach this white line right here.
Interesting.
That's a little wild when you think about it. And also it's wild to see how everything kind of forms into a web. You know, like with the galaxy clusters and the galaxy strands, all that kind of a deal.
Yeah, it's just hard to fathom.
Yeah, it's an interesting kind of a thing.
Also, someone said months ago, one of y'all was saying aliens don't exist. It wasn't me. I've never said that.
It was me. It was me.
Yeah, me personally, I would say the odds probably support the fact that some form of life exists elsewhere. It may not be life like we know it, like humanoid life, like life forms like that. It could simply be like microbial or bacterial or something like that. It could be something more simple. I just don't know, but it would seem like out of all the planets and all the possibilities, that why would Earth be the only one? That wouldn't really make much sense.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Also, someone pointing out something very interesting. This really does look like a series of neurons in a brain, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does, honestly.
Yeah, it really does. You know, it's like, that's interesting. It's like, what if we are a tiny part of a massive brain? You know, like it's just made up of stars and galaxies.
Yeah. Honestly, like we don't get into politics or religion on the channel, but I mean, when you look at this, it's like it's hard to think that it's like suddenly came into existence. You know, like it just like poof, it was here one day. It's like, seems like there's a little bit more to the story than that.
But let's see. And let's see here. Universe is expanding at a rate of 3.2 million light years per year. That actually means, Vinny, if that's true, I don't know. I would assume it's true because I don't really know. That means this really isn't expanding hardly at all, actually, you know, when you think about it, because for it to be 93 billion light years across and it's only expanding about 3.2 million light years, that's actually hardly expanding the universe at this point. It's almost fixed in place on the scale that it's at, being what it is. It would take, at least in our observable time frame, more hundreds of millions of years to see the universe expand to any noticeable additional size. I think I've actually heard that apparently they expect in the future the speed at which the universe is expanding will actually stop and it'll actually begin to recede on itself and shrink down.
You know, the thought I've always had in my head, I don't know if anybody else has ever thought this. I've always thought in my head, and this isn't like, you know, this is just my thoughts, my brain going rampant, but I was thinking, what if we are all living in a simulation here that's been created, and that when we go to sleep, that's the simulation being turned off, kind of like you turn off a video game. Like, for example, if you turn on, like, for example, Grand Theft Auto 5, it creates this fake world. The characters, the NPCs exist in it. They go about their activities according to what they've been programmed to do. But when you turn the game off, that's when you go to sleep. And when the game's turned back on, that's when you wake up and another day starts. It's kind of an interesting thought.
Yeah, it's a really, maybe that's the case. I don't know. I dream when I sleep, so I don't think it's turning off like at all. I dream a lot, so I'm like, yeah, I think it's still on. But like the universe is an incredibly interesting thing. Like, the Hubble Deep Field, telescope image, and that little red square down here, Matthew, near the moon, that was the area that the Hubble telescope took a picture of, and this was what was in it.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's just insane. And all of those are galaxies as infinitesimally large as the Milky Way, some even far larger than that. And they just look like small specks of light off in the distant horizon of the solar system, which is a really, really wild thing to think about. I really like that one. That one just looks cool. Like it's almost like a rock. It's like, wow, that's really cool. But that little tiny speck of light is made up of a untold number of stars, solar systems, and planets that are incredibly hard to observe from the distance that we're at right now, even with the technology that we have. Really cool stuff when you think about it. Really neat. Also, look at that one. That's incredibly cool.
Yeah, that is cool. I like that.
Yeah, but one thing that is really interesting is that galaxies really don't exist as spherical objects. They are flat for the large part. But as you can see, some of them here, like this one, is largely laid flat, towards the Hubble. So you just see the side of the galaxy, but this one's more so facing directly onwards towards our galaxy, so you see the flat edge of it, or the front edge of it, I guess.
Yeah. I could get super philosophical here if I can get that out, but it makes you wonder. It's like, I know some people out there are real pragmatic. They think, oh, well, there's a scientific explanation for everything. Like every single dot of light you see right there's a scientific reason for why it came into existence and things like that. It's just hard to believe that this stuff just happened to just show up one day. Like I'm not going to start preaching here or anything like that. We're not going to do that. But to me personally, I just don't think it just showed up here. I think it was created by God. Honestly, it had to be, in my opinion.
It's a wildly interesting thing to look at. To think that all of this was to be made by some sort of a random creation is pretty bizarre. Well, not bizarre, but it's pretty wild to think and imagine, because it's just very interesting. That's really all I can say about it. Maybe the best thing I could say about it. It's just wildly interesting. And also, I believe that that's one of the nearest stars to our solar system right there, that's being seen in this telescope, although I'm not entirely sure on that. But still interesting nevertheless. But nevertheless, with that, well, I say nevertheless a million times, it is time for us to move on to the next one.
All right, so we are now moving on here. And also, by the way, I want to make this clear because I always feel a little bit torn about this. We don't cover religion or politics on the channel. Obviously, I'm a Christian. I'm not saying that to be like, oh, I'm better than somebody or something like that. That's what I believe, and that's what I truly feel is right personally. And I see BC Skyman said, absolutely made by God. That's what I think. But I'm not here to force that on anybody. If you don't want to believe that, that's up to you. But that's what I think personally. And I just felt like saying that because I don't want to feel like I'm, shying away from saying what I believe in because we're just trying to be neutral here or something like that. That's personally what I believe. And I'm just going to, say it outright. But anyways, moving into our next super chat here. This one goes to Rye Guy SR, who puts in a $20 donation. And thank you very much, Rye Guy, for that $20 support. And he said, still watching last night's stream, but it was great. And you guys keep up the good work. And for the record, I love when you guys talk politics because you keep it real simple. What's good or bad for the citizens?
And I thank you for the support. I would generally say I wasn't talking politics last night, more so foreign policy sorts of deals, which I differentiate foreign policy and politics because I view politics more so as the topics that, generally I view that more so as topics that I find irrelevant, in my opinion, to be entirely honest, that deal with domestic affairs that I don't think the federal government really has a say in, for example, how in the world do I say that without people immediately taking that as political because the topics are brought up? But I'll bring up one, gun control. That's just one that I feel like that's a domestic political topic that's really blown out of proportion on a federal level. That's more so for the states to decide on a state-to-state basis for the large part. So I find those to be inconsequential domestic political topics that we really don't need to cover or talk about on this channel because it's really just out of the scope of what we do. And how in the world does it really weigh into what we're talking about on this channel, which is more so foreign policy concerns, which I don't really see as political because there generally is just a clear framework and a guideline that really everyone generally does follow. That's just clear and obvious. Those domestic political answers, like the one I just brought up on gun control, people will always say, no matter what, that there's always a clear answer to every every single topic like that one. You know, some people are going to say, well, obviously the answer to that is to let everyone have machine guns, and then some people are going to say, well, obviously everyone shouldn't have a gun. But if the answer was clear, then there wouldn't be an argument or discussion or a difference in opinion. As far as America's affairs and interests abroad, there really is only one direction to go with that. And while some people try and make it into an argument or say that there is different things that we can do, largely those things are done to the detriment of the nation and the benefits of the citizenry. So I don't really feel like those are a political kind of a deal, because there's really only one way that it can go. But I do thank you so much for the support and enjoying that stream last night, because it was certainly an interesting stream. But nevertheless, I do thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this channel possible, and we wouldn't be able to keep it running. And so with that, a huge thanks to you so much once again. And also, really quickly, I wasn't trying to open a discussion on gun control. I was just bringing it up as a example of a domestic political topic. So please don't take that as a moment to start soapboxing about it, because if you have your opinions, you have your opinions. Please exercise your right to vote and go vote for the representatives in your state governments that you believe would best see out your wishes. But that's not anything for this channel. So with that, I hope that does address that somewhat well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one goes to PFG Armor, who puts in the 20. And thank you very much, PFG, for the support. And they said, I've been a fan of the show for 3 years now, and I appreciate all the hard work.
Hey, and thank you so much for the support, and thank you for watching for 3 years. I mean, that's absolutely wild, and I gotta thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to keep this channel running and make it possible. And so with that, a big thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Carlos Consorcio Castellano Perez, who puts in a $20 donation. And thank you very much, Carlos, for that support. And I must say, that is a very, very good name right there, by the way. I almost had a hard time pronouncing it, but very interesting. And they said, good evening, Enforcer Matt and the viewers. And I've been wondering that since a lot of the Mexican cartels are now considered terror organizations, do you believe we'll see drone strikes in Mexican cities? Now, on that one, if you're asking my opinion specifically, I would say probably not drone strikes in Mexican cities by solely the United States. We might maybe launch a joint operation with Mexico to go in and take out some of these cartel sites. And honestly, most of the times, they really don't have strongholds inside the city itself. It's usually outside the city, but they do have, obviously, safe houses within city territories, but usually it's outside of it. So we might start seeing maybe some drone strikes outside in coordination with Mexico, but we have been flying surveillance flights out on the Texas border with Mexico, and also in other areas like the Baja little part of California over there as well. So we're doing a lot of surveillance, so it could be coming. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that, in my opinion, I think it's highly plausible that that actually can happen, because considering that they've been designated terrorist organization, that largely gives the United States government a letter of marque to itself to be able to conduct any actions to destroy these organizations, including the use of force of arms. So I largely would say yes, most likely in conjunction with the Mexican government, but I do not believe, now I will say this, nothing's out of the question with the current administration in terms of foreign policy. I'll just be completely frank on that, because, you know, they float somewhat wild ideas like turning Gaza into a U.S. territory, but I still have a feeling that even at that, they would most likely ask the permission of the Mexican central government, the federal government that is, to be able to conduct these strikes against these cartel organizations before they actually carried them out. Because without getting proper approval or authorization, the United States is conducting a illegal flight of a U.S. military aircraft into sovereign Mexican airspace, and then conducting an armed attack on Mexican territory against a terrorist organization, yes, according to U.S. legal definition, but without the authority or consent of the Mexican government to use their airspace for the use of armed action. So I have a feeling there would probably be some international legalities that would be an issue to not getting approval from the central Mexican government to do such a thing, but I have a feeling that they'll most likely still get that approval, because that would be wild to not do such a thing. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. I thank you once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to keep this thing running and make it possible. And also, really quickly, I see some people talking about the whole universe thing. Like, you know, saw some people earlier saying the Enforcer absolutely doesn't know everything about the space. And obviously not. Like, I'm not like an expert on everything, but you know, like in my defense, can't someone just, you know, be interested in something without having to be an expert on it, you know? Like, just kind of, you know, talking about it because I found it interesting, thought y'all might find it interesting. Maybe you know more? Great. But, you know, like, I don't know everything about everything. Sometimes I just talk about things because they look interesting to me. And also, I'm not going to be one to come up with stuff that I don't know. Like, as far as I'm concerned, what's beyond the observable universe is nothing. Like, if there's nothing out there, there's nothing out there. Like, that's what it is to me. If you observe it and it looks like that is what it is what it is. If lightning is bright, lightning... Oh, what in the world? What in the...
Huh?
What in the world? Man, this thing took up the full screen. What is going on? Oh, there we go. Okay, I was like, what the hell? But beyond that...
Well, while that's going on, I've got a chopper flying out in front of the place out here. Like right now, I don't know what the hell this is about. There's like it doesn't sound like the medevac helicopter usually flies over. It sounds like a bigger one. So I don't know what the hell is going on outside, but you know, something is.
Escaped convict. Like, it's just probably... But,
sounds like a Black Hawk, honestly, out there. It sounds like something beefy.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder what that is. But beyond that, to get back to the whole universe thing, if it is what it is what it is. If lightning is bright and flashes, it's bright and it flashes. If you cannot see something, it's just not there. Like, I don't get into like the whole conspiracy theory kind of a thing. I just keep it simple. Like, what's in front of you, what you can see, that's what it is. Like, $1's $1. That's what it is. There's nothing much more to it. You know, that kind of a deal. But I hope that does kind of throw that out there for some of those discerning snobs that want to act like I have to know everything about everything. Like, I'm not going to know about quantum theory and stuff. I can promise you that. Like, listen, I'm not someone who has to go around acting like I know everything. I do pretty well in what we do, and that's about it. Beyond that, I'm not really going to know much. But anyways, with that, we are on to the next one.
And also, someone was saying something about, I wonder because they're really not announcing these immigration raids anywhere. I wonder if they're doing some type of raid here or something like that. That might be jumping the gun a little bit, but I don't know. Like, it sounds like a Black Hawk outside, and I know what the other helicopters sound like because we have a hospital nearby that has medevac helicopters landing it all the time from around Alabama. But this one does not sound like that. I'm still hearing it. I don't know if
go
that's
outside
and
take a gander at it real quick and tell us what it looks like. I mean, you probably won't
I'm
be
not
able
going
to see
outside,
it.
man. It's 20 degrees out there.
Oh, wait a minute, hang on. Oh, dang, yeah, it is. Okay, never mind. Yeah, you'd freeze to death. But yeah, I wonder what that is because if it's just hovering around out there, it might actually be some kind of a nice raid happening in Birmingham. That'd be interesting if it has, because I don't think those have reached the city yet.
Or we said one too many words about Leon, and he's sending a welcome committee, one or the other.
Whoa, big crowd. That's it. But anyways, we're on to the next one.
And our next one goes to R.A. That Girl Chicago, who puts in a $10 donation. And thank you very much, R.A. That Girl Chicago, for that support. And he said, I don't think the world will fall without U.S., but it's also not our primary job to police the world. And I hate the policy 180 especially because our new friend is guilty of everything that Ukraine is accused.
And I thank you for the support. I largely would say it is America's responsibility to be out there doing these things. Like it actually is for the large part. We could walk away if we want to. It's not within our interests. The United States is the leader of the Western sphere. Like, China isn't out there saying, okay, we're the leader of our sphere. Okay, go Pakistan, go do something where you're going to literally defend the entire sphere. You're going to be the defender of the realm. Like, nobody does that. Like, as a leader of a sphere, you just don't do that because why are you the leader of the sphere if nobody is going to reap the rewards of you being the leader? Like, there's inherent benefits to being the leader of a sphere. We get massive amounts of trade deals that are incredibly beneficial to the United States. It allows our economy to be the largest in the world. Without a doubt. Without a shadow of a doubt. This right here, this graph actually represents the 3 largest national economies in the world. The United States at $27.7 trillion, China at $17.8, and then Japan at $4.2 trillion. The United States beats out everybody. And the reason why we beat out everybody is because everybody in the world that has an economy, that has anything about it, wants to be friends with the United States. We give them security assurances, and we continue to be out there representing our interest on behalf of all of our allies, not only in our support, but their support. That's why we have such a successful economy. And so for us to say we shouldn't be out there and we should leave, we're giving up everything that has made the U.S. economy this successful. Like, there has been no time since World War II, since this graph has measured GDP data on Google, where the United States has not been out there and has not been the leader of the sphere in every single way. The world police, as people call it. There's never been a time, and all of the benefits that people hold dear now and say, wow, this is it's really been a successful country economically. All of those reasons why is because we've been out there being the world police. And another thing is that we have to be out there to defend our own interests itself, regardless of the allies. Throw all the allies to the curb at this point. We have to be out there to secure our interests. We have to be out there to see that there are people that buy American goods. We have to be out there to make sure that we secure the resources that we need to import to America to then get the raw resources we need to produce the goods we produce. All those things we have to be out there securing, because if we're not out there securing it or protecting our supply or trade with other people, other countries like China are easily going to step in and disrupt that. And if we're not there to defend it or protect it, it's going to easily be disrupted, and that's going to end up with negative results to the U.S. economy. It's a fairly big thing, and this is something that a lot of people don't know about. For example, with Canada is a major exporter to the United States of potash, and potash is used in fertilizers, a lot of fertilizers, as a matter of fact, and also other kinds of applications. But the U.S. agricultural industry largely relies on those potash imports. This leads us to actually have a trade deficit with Canada because of all the materials that we import, and they don't export as much American goods. But at the same time, we import this potash in extremely large amounts. It's relatively inexpensive, but when you add it all together, it actually does cost a pretty penny. But nevertheless, that potash allows us to fertilize our fields and grow our crops better than anyone else can in the world, so that way we have the most impressive crop yields every year, which produces crops that are sold for money in the United States that is worth far more than the value of the trade deficit that we have with Canada. In short, that trade deficit actually is producing us money in the long run because of the raw resources we got from them to produce the even more valuable goods that we get in the end run. With that in mind, we have to be out there. Like, people don't get that because they haven't lived in a world where we have not been out there. But we have to be out there defending our interests. Otherwise, we're going to have nothing left to defend. So with that, I hope that does address it well. And also, someone said Germany's economy is now higher than Japan's. Really? Let me go check. GDP. Holy smokes, it's the first time in history. That is crazy, because I remember checking this and the graph had not updated for 2023 yet, but Germany has actually beat Japan to be the third largest economy in the world. Whack. Dude, Japan used to always be the third largest by far, like almost always, but Japan has economically stagnated since the 90s, and so it appears that the Germans have finally caught up. The French are actually not doing that bad for themselves either. How's the UK doing? Oh, actually, they're not doing that bad. But India is skyrocketing at this point. India is probably going to end up becoming the next China with how it looks like they're an economic miracle and they're going to overtake everyone and then they flatten out at some point. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that somewhat well. And thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And also, while I was doing my usual checks for news on Twitter to see what was happening, I see that a new whirlybird just got discovered in the bats again, apparently in the same place as last time. Yikes. But anyways, they're saying it has a potential for human infection as well, which is also not good. But moving on here to our next super chat. This one goes to Flash1, who puts in a $20 donation. And thank you very much, Flash1, for that support and always helping to keep the channel running. And Flash said, hi there, Enforcer Matt and Enforcer, and hello, LOC. And I love the show, and your passion in what you do is brilliant. And in my opinion, that's why some want to bring you down. And so I say don't let them.
And thank you so much for the support and the kind words. I would say that might be the case. Some people are just crazy, though, like legitimately crazy. And, you know, they just do what they do. There's no way to explain it, honestly. But we're not going to let them bring us down because we're just going to ban this, folks, from this point forward. No questions asked. But beyond that, I do thank you so much for the support and the kind words, because folks like you help to make this channel possible and help us to keep this thing running day in and day out. And so with that, thank you so much once again. And we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Con LSA, who puts in a 10. And thank you very much, Con, for the $10 support and helping to keep us running. And Con says, we've done nothing. Wait a minute, this seems like a repeat of the other one. I'm not sure if it is. I think Con put this one in twice, but he put in the other one that we got to first. So if that is the case, thank you very much, Con, for that $10 support. And we appreciate that very much once again. And we also have a $10 super chat from Hoodoo, Texas, who says, how horrible, fantastic, incredible it is that we should be digging trenches here because of a quarrel in a faraway country between people of whom we know nothing. Chamberlain, 9/27 of 1938 in Munich.
And that is a quote that aged like milk. Honestly, like that was one of the worst ones that could have ever been thrown out, especially with what happened afterwards. Because he pretty much had to leave in disgrace after the fact because it went that badly. It really kind of does show you can't say those kinds of things all the time because it just ends up poorly for the large part. But nevertheless, I do thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one here goes to Hoodoo, Texas once again, who puts in a 10. And thank you very much, Hoodoo, for the $10 support the second time around. We appreciate it. And Hoodoo says, the art of the deal, quote unquote, I never get too attached to one deal or one approach. I keep a lot of balls in the air because most deals fall out, no matter how promising they may seem at first. The only problem with that, Hoodoo, is they're not collecting bids necessarily for this peace deal in Ukraine. There's only two parties here, and there's no alternatives. So that typical strategy there of an art of a deal, that may work in business, like when you're in business here in the United States and you're trying to, come to a business agreement. But I'm not sure if that really, follows over to this situation. I'm not sure if it's the same. I think he might be trying to make a shoe fit where it doesn't fit. But Enforcer, what say you?
Business and governmental administration are two entirely different animals. Because in business, one always wants to cut down cost and make something as lean as possible and also look out to make something profitable to benefit shareholders. And while one could say that the government's always supposed to benefit the citizenry, it usually does that at the expense of profitability. Like a lot of government services, most of them really don't make the government money directly. For example, the production of interstates does not inherently make the government any money outright. That is just a public service the government does. And I know a lot of people are saying, well, it makes the money by increasing the tax base, but that's an indirect earning off the interstate. They don't have toll roads set up on the interstates to make money off of them. It's not a money-making venture. And if the government wanted to save money, they just wouldn't make interstates. They wouldn't have national parks. There wouldn't be Food and Drug Administration food inspectors. There wouldn't be any of that kind of a deal because you would want to be making it as lean and trim as possible. And the art of the deal, I have not read, I will admit. But at the same time, to say that you never really get attached to one deal or like that is a little bit rough to put out here because it's not really like we're going, let's end the war to Ukraine. Let's get a Russian bid on the end, a Chinese bid, and an Indian bid. There's no one else involved in the war except for Ukraine and Russia. So you either work with the Russians or you don't. And you keep the war going until they want to work with you. In this kind of a situation, there is no, well, it fell through. Oh, well, we'll just move on to the next group. There isn't another group. If it falls through with the Russians, it just falls through. So what you have to do is you have to pretty much go with this more dog-headed approach, which wouldn't seem sensible to someone in business, which is the Russian Federation must be brought to the negotiating table. Are you going to come to it? Here are the clear terms that we're largely going to be looking for. The Russians say no. No? Okay, war goes on. We give the Ukrainians more weapons and arms. They continue to bomb the Russians into submission. Eventually, the Russians come to the table. That's how it largely works. That's how Kennedy worked it. That's how Nixon worked it. That's how everyone worked it. I mean, like, that's how FDR worked it. That's how Theodore Roosevelt worked it. And everyone has worked it like that because in the diplomatic world, you can't really apply the same rules as business because the kind of competition that exists in business doesn't exist in governance and administration for the large part. There really is no competition because it's like, do we get a better bid from the Russians? It's like, no, they're the Russians. They're either going to accept our terms or we're going to accept their terms or we're going to find some middle ground. And those are the only options that we have. But still, I thank you for the support, Hoodoo, Texas, and helping this channel keep running. That's still an interesting point. It's just that I think that business and governance are different things. But with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one here goes to Hoodoo, Texas, who puts in a 10 once again. And thank you very much, Hoodoo, for I believe this, the third or fourth support of the night. We appreciate it. And he says that the problem is that a nuclear war, once triggered, takes on an inertia of its own and will effectively destroy the Northern Hemisphere. And in the final analysis, Putin is a psychopath.
And I thank you for the support, Hoodoo, Texas. I would agree that nuclear war is something that has to be avoided, but at the same time, we can't be so scared of it to appease at all costs. Because originally, before nuclear weapons were a thing, war was the ultimate end and beginning. And so the British and the French went, well, we don't want war with Germany, so we'll give up Austria and the Sudetenland to the Germans. And then that ended up into World War II anyways. So sometimes you just have to kind of bite the bullet head on and go, if this is going to be the end, we're going to go out swinging. And that's kind of the approach you have. And then the other side will go, I'm not really that gung-ho on this. Let's all talk this down a little bit, and then you get to the negotiating table. But you either have to ramp it all the way up to 10, so that way everyone wants to hop off that, inevitable death that will be happening, or you have to get the Russians into a position where they just can't keep the war going, and then they're actually seriously going to negotiate and compromise. But still, I thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one here is going to go to X, who puts in a 10. And thank you very much, X, for that support. Hey! I said, Enforcer, I'm confused. I think we're experiencing a true fog of war. The White House and TC is saying that Russia has decimated Ukraine, but I hear others, other YouTubers, and Zelenskyy saying Ukraine is winning. I'm confused.
The White House is just putting out a bunch of crap that just isn't true. Like, it's just being completely frank. Like if you're questioning, well, some people are saying Ukraine's doing fine, and the White House is saying that Ukraine is losing. Well, the fact of the matter is that the White House also said that Ukraine started the war, and I think that anyone with sense, and I know that you certainly have sense, would know that Ukraine obviously didn't start the war when it was Russian tanks that rolled into Ukraine, not the other way around. And the Ukrainians didn't fire onto the Russians to start the war. The Russians fired on Ukraine first by firing missiles at most strategic sites and major cities. So with all that in mind, I would generally have to say, yes, the White House is saying something completely different to everyone else, but for the large part, their take on the Ukraine war is living in a fictitious land. There's no reality that these statements are based on at this point from the White House. So with that, I hope that does address that well, and I thank you once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Turbo Divergent, who puts in a 10. And thank you very much, Turbo, for the support. They said, what's the deal with grape nuts? They aren't grapes. They aren't nuts.
I don't know. I have never heard of a grape nut. Like, I've never heard of it. Let me go pull that up. It's a brand of cereal that is in the United States. I have never heard of grape nuts. What are these? Like, look at that.
It looks like bran or something.
It kind of just does. Like, it's made from flour, salt, and dried yeast. That doesn't actually sound that good. Post's original product was baked as a rigid sheet, then broken into pieces and run through a coffee grinder. This sounds terrible. I don't know. For some reason, this is a very unappetizing sound of kind of a cereal. I don't know. Like, I've never heard of this thing, and I don't know why they're called grape nuts either, because it doesn't really make any sense. But beyond that, thank you once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running, and we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Glock Who's Dare, who puts in a $10 donation, and thank you very much, Mr. Glock, for that support. He said, Corgi and Coffee Fun.
Hey, and thank you so much for the Corgi and Coffee Fund. Little Mosu will work. He's feeling a little unwell right now, but hopefully we'll get that sorted out. He's kind of got to get a little surgery, to be entirely honest with everyone. So hopefully, fingers crossed, everything goes well with that. But I do thank you so much for support to the Mosu will work fund and the Coffee Fund. And so with that, a big thanks to you so much once again. And we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Peter Florence, who puts in a 5 and says, my dad flew F-4 Phantom II for the Navy.
Oh, that's really cool. I love the F-4 Phantom. It shouldn't be able to fly. Its wings are too small to get its fat little body off the ground, but the Phantom flies anyways, because Phantoms don't care what the laws of physics say, and it's just a cool plane. I think these were neat, clearly outdated by today's standards, but they're very cool for what they were at the time. I think they're really, really neat, and I like their look. The style was clean.
Yeah, I would say it's pretty clean, personally.
I mean, it's incredibly clean. Anyone who says otherwise is commie, and they're un-American, and we'll have to stick Senator McCarthy on them. But nevertheless, they're cool. That's all I have to say about them. But nevertheless, thank you so much once again. I hope that addressed that well. And we are on to the next one.
And our next one is going to go to Mountain of Entities, who puts in a 5. And thank you very much for that support. I said, your opinion, please. If you were in Zelensky's shoes, what would you do to defeat Russia under these circumstances?
I would make sure to make great alliances with European partners and continue to see that funding and financing continues to be received by Ukraine so we can finance the war effort. We simply do not have the economic ability to support the crushing amount of funds needed to keep the war running. And that's why Zelenskyy goes around the world practically every week asking for more money, because the only way for the Ukrainians to survive the war is on foreign funding. And so I hope that does address that incredibly well. Because as far as Zelenskyy is concerned, he just has to keep up the same business, which is to try and make sure that there are foreign supporters of the state of Ukraine.
And so I hope that does address that well. And thank you once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Boog, who puts in a $5 donation. And thank you very much for that support, by the way, and helping to keep us running. I don't see a comment attached, but thank you very much for supporting the channel. And we also have a super chat that just came in from Butchie777, who puts in a £10 donation and puts in a super sticker of the YouTube hippo with its fist going up and it's smiling. And it says KO for knockout, I guess. That thing's happier than Mike Tyson when he knocks someone silly. But Enforcer, what say you?
I gotta thank you so much for the support, Butchie777, and helping this channel to keep on running. Because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this thing possible, and we wouldn't be able to keep it rolling. And so a huge thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to John Combist, who puts in a 5. And thank you very much, John, as well. He said, I don't like political talk either, but the current U.S. president is showing peace through strength. Yeah, but he's got to do that with our allies, though. Like he's got to show strength against our enemies and peace with our allies. It can't be strength and roughhousing our allies and peace with the enemy. That's that's a little backwards.
Yeah, I thank you for the support, but I largely would have to say this isn't peace through strength. This is peace through cowardice, but then beating up I almost would describe this as a domestic abuse situation. Like that's almost what it seems like, because we pretty much are parroting exactly what Russian propaganda is at this point, and then we go into our house and then we beat the shit out of the Europeans. Like, it doesn't really make a lot of sense how that's working, because that's not peace through strength. I mean, the people we're beating up at this point are our own allies, and we're making them feel so beat down that the Europeans are about to go off and do their own thing. So that's not really peace through strength. That's more so losing our entire sphere, and then also getting nothing from our adversaries because we're just going to give everything away to them, and just leave it at that. I would generally say that this isn't the way to go about that. Peace through strength would be to consolidate with our allies, ensure that we are all on a strong, good footing against the Russians, and then face them down with a strong, largely uncompromising kind of an approach, and then soften it up for the negotiations. So go into the negotiations strong-headed, and then actually enter them level-headed and be willing to compromise. That would largely be the kind of approach that I would say would be peace through strength. This is appeasement attempted to be disguised as peace through strength. That's largely what I would believe. But I do thank you for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Dunkel X, who puts in a 5. And thank you very much, Dunkel, for the support. They said, good evening, Enforcers. I missed yesterday's stream, so my question is, what was both of your opinions on the U.S. accusations toward Ukraine yesterday? And I would say, personally, me, I'm making no bones about it. I was disgusted by it. The accusation that Zelenskyy is a dictator is completely false and not grounded in fact. He was democratically elected. That's been known for ages. And once again, his approval rating is not 4%. There was no source cited to back that up. That was simply just a bold-faced lie that was just brought up and said out of nowhere. The accusations don't even have any possible basis in fact. And, it's just the lying like that. Like most politicians, they always lie. Like politicians will always lie about everything, but at least they have some plausible deniability to their lies. These current lies right here have not even an inkling of any foundation at all, which is just appalling to hear that coming out of the United States. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say that these statements were completely against American and Western interests. They were abhorrent, really. I've never heard statements like that before, and the statements were markedly untrue. The Russian Federation invaded Ukraine. That's been known since the beginning. And not only that, Zelenskyy is not a dictator. Constitutionally, elections are not allowed in the state of Ukraine currently because of the constitutional law and the declaration of martial law due to the fact that they are currently being invaded by a foreign adversary. So for these reasons, those statements are completely markedly untrue, and not only that, are greatly misrepresenting the foreign policy situation that that we're seeing in Eastern Europe right now. Also, there's a whole lot more to unpack, but I'll leave it at that. I would highly recommend, though, that you go back to yesterday, because I think I went on like a 30-minute rant about it, and it was just a straight up rant. Like it was just everything I was thinking at the moment, and it was pretty succinct, but still, I think that's a lot better of a description than I could ever give in a shorter amount of time. But with that, I do hope that addresses that incredibly well. Thank you once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Kachulian343, who puts in 2 super chats. And thank you very much, Kachulian, for that support. Actually, 3 super chats. And our first one says, people aren't taking the Chernobyl attack seriously enough because Putin is testing NATO to see how far he can go. And I think he wants to use a tactical nuke.
I'd actually would say the people didn't take it seriously because it wasn't allowed to be put out to people. That's something that we really can't get into a lot. But we noticed that video was deprioritized when we put it out in the algorithms, and it looks like everyone else who made a video about it was deprioritized as well. So that might be why a lot of people didn't pay a lot of attention to it, because apparently someone higher up said that it cannot matter to the public and it can't really be talked about, so everyone got deprioritized for talking about it. So I hope that does address that somewhat well, at least from what we were able to assess, but that's largely what we've seen so far at this point. But people are not taking that seriously enough, and that was a very serious, overt kind of a threat that was being made by the Russians, that they could hit the sarcophagus and start to leak out that radiation into the surrounding areas. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Kachulian343 once again. They said also, when Enforcer wins the presidency, I was wondering if he had any goals, and he had, that he could share without getting political.
Yes, there's actually a decent amount of goals that I can share without getting political. Some things that I don't think people really give a damn about, but I give a damn about them because I know it would benefit the public. First off, I would like to see the public transportation system in the United States get fleshed out to where people can actually travel around. And I'm not saying from airport to airport. I'm talking about pretty much everywhere on public transportation. I also want to see that mental institutions are brought back. In the best case scenario, they will be able to rehabilitate these people and hopefully help to fix or alleviate their mental issues, or at least keep them out of sight of the public in the worst case scenario, so that way they're not causing a massive disturbance and making public areas wildly unsafe for the general citizenry. Another thing that I'd like to see is I'd like to see the United States continue to take an incredibly strong posture against our adversaries and our adversaries around the world, making sure to keep them at bay and making sure to contain them as best as possible. I believe in a heavy policy of containment with practically no exceptions. The Chinese must be contained, the Russians must be contained, and every other minor power that we're a rival with must also be contained under all circumstances. And anything that needs to be done as far as defense is concerned to make that possible will be done. Also, another thing is that one thing that I really think is an important thing in this country these days is to make sure to protect or really foster well-paying jobs for the American citizenry. Nowadays, with how things work, no one ever gets brought on as a full-time employee. No one's ever provided the benefits that citizens should deserve or largely expect when working as an American citizen. Generally, what I want to ensure is that the quality of life is better. That's something that is never assured these days. I can speak for my generation, and I know that by the time I'm running for president, most people actually would probably be younger than me by that point. But nevertheless, one thing that I'm seeing in my generation is that nobody is ever given the same shot at things that folks were given in the past, and I think that they should be. One thing that is wildly annoying to me is that no company anymore takes on full-time employees because they have to provide them with benefits such as medical insurance and other things that they consider to be exorbitant costs. So they'd rather hire on a fleet of part-time employees that are paid practically nothing, get no benefits, and generally are living in squalor. Rent is incredibly expensive. Buying a house is incredibly expensive. The federal government should make every single action necessary and possible to bring down the price of housing and also the price of rent as much as it possibly can be. We also need to try and ensure that American citizens are able to get more higher paying jobs and to be able to facilitate them in being able to get those higher paying jobs. And if necessary, we will try and find some way to make it to where it is possible for people not to be debt slaves the rest of their life for trying to go to college, especially if a lot of the jobs that we're bringing in or creating in the United States require some sort of white collar education. But
also, they need to, another thing you need to do is and they need to bust up the monopolies and actually enforce all the
The
monopoly laws
antitrusts.
again. Yeah, the antitrust laws. They need to actually enforce those again. They're still in the books, but they're not being enforced. At least if you broke up these large companies that have a monopoly on major industries right now, at least that would give small business a chance to be able to at least attempt to compete with these massive companies. Because if you have small business back, presumably small business will be a little bit more, thinking about their employees and loyalty to their employees. Once businesses get too big, they don't worry about their employees anymore. They start looking at everything from a very corporate perspective, and people are just numbers. In small business, if you can try to flourish a small business again, maybe people will be looked at as people instead of as numbers again. And right now, we don't have small business really flourishing because these huge companies are literally like sharks. They're running everybody out of business. And y'all know the big ones. I'm not even going to name them, but that's a problem.
And also another thing that I would say, a couple of other things, is that I do not believe in any single circumstance that the federal government should have a decision or a say in some of the major domestic political issues that the federal government is invested in nowadays. That is not the responsibility of the federal government. That is the responsibility of your state government. The federal government is here to ensure that, as far as our position abroad is concerned, that the United States is on good standing and putting our rivals into a corner. And on the home front, we are here to ensure, as the federal government, the prosperity of the American citizenry and leave the moral matters to the state governments. So that way, if one state has a different opinion than the other, then that opinion is totally fine. There's really no correct, like I'll say this, and this is something that people just can't admit. There really is no correct answer to a lot of the pressing domestic political issues that exist, because they are questions of morality, and each state may have a completely different answer to those questions than others. That doesn't mean that that answer is right or wrong, and I don't really believe that the federal government should be coming in on a lot of those moral questions and being the arbiter across the entire republic as to what is right and wrong. I believe that is really up to each state to decide. And so if one state says that they want to loosen up gun control, that's on them. And if one state wants to restrict it heavily, that's also on them as well. That's largely the will of the people of those states, and I don't really believe that the federal government has a right or a responsibility to step in and try and make broad, sweeping statements about every single moral issue in this country and pretty much lock it down in place to where the citizenry of each state largely don't have a say in how their own state is governed or what the laws of their state are. Another thing that I'd also say, another thing that I believe would be very important is to largely the best thing I can boil it down to is that, in my opinion, the federal government's only responsibilities, if I was president, was to try and ensure that everyone across the board was as prosperous as possible economically. Any moral decisions will largely be left to y'all, to your state governments, and then I would also be trying to make sure that the United States remains in good standing around the world, so that way we have incredibly good economic relationships that are beneficial to the United States and bring more money into the pockets of the American citizenry. That also means that we have to support small businesses, because I would largely honestly say that back when small businesses were the king of the U.S. economy, it seemed as though the average lot of the U.S. citizenry was far better then than it is now, with the major corporations largely running almost every single facet of life. You don't see a mom and pop's grocer anymore. You don't see mom and pop restaurants. Everything is run by corporations, and those corporations are killing the American citizenry slowly yet surely, and their quality of life. While the GDP is increasing, that increase is not being felt by your common citizen. And I would largely like to see that all of y'all have the kind of prosperity that would be needed to be able to see that y'all have comfortable and well lived lives for the large part. That would be my general take.
And I say eliminate the self-employment tax for individuals making under $500,000 a year. That's what I would say as well. That extra, basically the 15 or 16%, whatever the self-employment tax is basically like a punishment, it feels like, to people that are self-employed. And those are people that are usually running small businesses that are paying that an exorbitant self-employment tax rate like that. And that's part of the reason why they can't get ahead, because they're paying extra. They're paying almost double in taxes that people that are employed are paying. So it's making it even harder for the small business to succeed, because the owner is having to pay out the ass in taxes, which is crazy. We should be giving those people tax breaks and not actually penalizing them by doubling their taxes.
Yeah, I would say that there's many things in this country that I think are an issue and can be fixed, but But the most important thing to remember is that they are fixable. Nothing is ever lost. This country is not lost. It's not dead. It's an amazing country. Like when you go around and you actually talk to folks, like we have traveling the country, I've never really run into a single bad person out there. There are bad eggs out there, but they're few and far in between. A lot of folks are just trying to get by and trying to have a good life the best they can. And I think that it is the federal government's responsibility alone to make sure that their bills are easier to pay and that they are able to afford more and live a better life. That's it. Beyond that, moralistic issues are largely left to the states, in my opinion. I think the 10th Amendment is fairly clear to that, that any powers that really aren't listed directly under the Constitution as the enumerated powers of the federal government largely go to the states. And there were very few things that were really laid out in the Constitution as enumerated powers or rights that the federal government had to largely exercise any control over moral issues. It largely was more so about the welfare of the nation at large, and the states had a lot of autonomy on deciding those moralistic issues. And you'll all know the leading ones, things like gun control, abortion, and such. I just don't really. I don't really think that the federal government should get into those kinds of messes, which I'll be honest, I know a lot of y'all would say there are clear answers to those questions, but if there was a clear answer to it, everyone would agree on those topics, and half of the country says one thing and half of the country says the other. I think it would be much easier to decide those matters at the state level and allow for everyone to come up with their own answers. Like whether people like that or not, like whether the state of Alabama agrees with your state or not, if you were living in the state of California and the state of California is doing what you want, that's all that really should matter, because you're living the life at that point. The state of Alabama is living the life apparently that they want to live. That was the kind of law that they wanted to pass. That was what it was on all of those topics. And I think that the federal government just shouldn't really step into that kind of a business and just go, well, that's up to all those states. They all, say things differently or not, as long as they aren't, just completely trampling on some kind of a constitutional right to the extreme, then, it is what it is. It's just kind of a laissez-faire kind of a deal with that. But beyond that, I want to make sure that while people are trying to decide those moral decisions, they're actually able to afford groceries, rent, and also be able to hopefully buy a house one day. Like that, I really just think that's one of the main aspects of the government, and that really requires us to also have an outward-looking perspective into the rest of the world to make sure that Americans are actually getting well-paying jobs and having the best shot of life that they can have. But at the end of the day, the only responsibility of the federal government is to ensure the welfare of the citizenry. That is it. And so by all means, that should be accomplished. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. I hope that, honestly, they almost went over all of my policy points, really. I think I kind of just hit them all right there. So hopefully you'll like that, and if you like it, vote for me for president in 2040, and hopefully I'll be able to give it a good crack. But I have a feeling I probably won't be able to. But still, try and vote for me, because it'll count.
People just want a chance. Like, that's honestly the way capitalism works. Not everybody's going to be successful. People understand that. But people at least feel comforted, at least if you don't become a millionaire and you don't become highly successful, but you live a normal life and you're able to survive and, and take care of yourself economically, at least you had a fair crack at it and you had a fair chance at becoming highly successful, at least in our system. But when people don't even feel like they have that fair chance, that starts becoming not even capitalism at that point. I'm not even sure what that is. It's just, it feels like oppression, honestly, at that point. It's just like, okay, I really had like such a minuscule chance of actually being successful because the odds were stacked against me, because major corporations are taking things over and all these other aspects going on as well, that I really didn't even have a fair crack at it. And that's demoralizing to people. That's what causes people to lose hope. And I think that's where we're at right now.
But my argument is, you don't have to be a CEO or a millionaire to have made it in this country. Like I think that that's something that should never be the moniker, is that you have to be rich to win in this country. You should be able to just work an honest, hardworking job and win. Like back in the day, that used to be the case. Back in what people call the good old days, which were the 50s and the 60s, the country was so economically well off that you could work a job as a bowling alley attendant and buy yourself a house, raise an entire family, send your kids to college, all on this salary. And not only that, be able to get into all kinds of hobbies and interests of your own intrigues without really ever having to worry too much about the finances. And of course, there were people back then that were not so fortunate, but nevertheless, I would like to see that all American citizens could have a shot at that kind of a life. It's not a life full of glamour and ritziness. It's not one where you become a millionaire or a CEO or you become the biggest success story around, but it's a life that people are happy in. People would be happy in that kind of a life, and that's the kind of life that you just don't see anymore in this country, and I think should really start coming back for the common people to see that that can be a reality for everyone.
But once you realize, though, that you basically have to be a millionaire to be able to retire in America right now, it becomes a necessity to almost become a millionaire. Being a millionaire back in the day, like just like 10, 20 years ago, used to mean, oh, that person is rich. They've really made it. Like they've really gone really big with that. But these days, to be able to retire with the inflation at the rate it's at and things like that, you have to have $1 million in the bank to be able to live the rest of your life in retirement, comfortably. I'm not talking about going out and buying new cars every year or something like that. I'm talking about just keeping the same car you got and just floating through retirement. You need $1 million to be able to just simply live for like 10 to 20 years on that retirement money. And even at that, I'm not sure if that's enough.
Well, yeah, but I meant like as a millionaire, I meant like, be like incredibly, like pretty much be loaded. Like that's what I meant. Like, nowadays financially, you pretty much do have to be a millionaire. But what I was meaning is, you don't have to be exorbitantly wealthy, by like a standpoint to where, you could buy a Bugatti or something like that. Like that's what I was largely thinking. It's like you could just get a nice car, have a nice house, be able to have a family and raise kids and actually afford to have kids. That kind of a deal. I think that's something that should start to return. And I think that people ought to have a lot of autonomy, because one thing that is really important as far as the rights of this nation goes is that ownership of private property is a massive gain of personal rights. That's something a lot of people don't know. Renters do not get the same rights that property owners have. And I believe that it's very important for people to be able to own their own businesses, to own their own houses, because there are many more additional rights that the United States provides to private property owners. And I think that that's something important to try and make sure that we encourage, is that there are small businesses so that way people own their own businesses, so that way they own their own destiny as far as their financial security, and that they also have their own property, so that way they can pretty much be the king of their own domains for the large part, much like it's always been in U.S. history.
That's true. And also, by the way, I see Ricky said in the live chat, said retirement, I need to basically die on the job site. And honestly, like that's so many people are facing that today. Like nobody really talks about that. A lot of people can't even retire. Like they have to keep working until basically they die. That's not good. Like that's not something that a civilized country that's well developed with a car should be expecting as the norm. That should not be the norm. People should not be dying on the job site and working until they're 80 years old. That shouldn't be it. Whenever I see someone who's 80 years old and still having to work a physical labor job or something, actually like out in the public where they're having to move a lot, I think that's horrible. Like that's horrible. They're at that age working like that. And yes, it's true. Some of these people might have made economically bad choices in life that led them to that spot, and we can't control that. Sadly, that's something we can't control. But if you're working hard your entire life, you should be able to retire at a reasonable age. And that reasonable age shouldn't be 80 years old, because it seems like the people that run the big companies think, let's keep increasing the retirement age to like 75 and 80 years old, and until people are basically like 5 years away from, going out. It's like, that's not even retirement at that point. You're working them until they're dead.
Yeah, it's not a great thing, the kind of situation we see these days. And I'll just be honest with y'all. Every time a new administration is brought in, they just keep saying the same thing. Things get worse. They really do nothing to fix it. In fact, they only really make the situation worse. And then when people point that out, they say, "Well, woo, boo-hoo. Well, look at you. You're such a wuss. Why don't you just suck it up and live with it, huh? Why don't you just buy a little less?" And it's so insulting. Because you see these people are pretty much sold out to the lobbyists, and they really don't have the interest of the citizenry at heart. And once they get in, they just make it incredibly clear that that is the case. Pretty much all of them do. Like there's no outlier to that. There's no exception to that. And so then people just live with it, and then people keep on going, well, out of the people who are pretty much bought and sold by lobbyists, let's pick the one that will screw us over the least, but they're still going to screw us over. It's a very bleak kind of a situation at this point, and I would hope that we would be able to fix it, and I do think that it is fixable. It's just that it's going to take a gargantuan effort to fix. But that doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means that we got to buckle in and get to it. But nevertheless, I hope that does address that somewhat well. Thank you so much once again for support, and I hope that lets y'all decide whether y'all would vote for me or not. But with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one here goes to Cachulian343 once again, who puts in a 5 and says, as a fan of 40K lore, I know you guys have a little free time for gaming, but have you tried Space Marine 2? And it's a game you can pick up and put down.
I actually have tried Space Marine 2. It's pretty good, and Warhammer 40K is interesting. It's just that it's not exactly my cup of tea. Now, a game that is my cup of tea is Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, which I actually just got recently, and it is so good. It is insanely good. And I've just been having a blast with it. I just got to the part where, well, I'm not going to spoil anything for anyone who might get the game, but it is really good. But still, beyond that, I do thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. But I'm always into very historically based games, and Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, it's just a spot. It's an amazing game. But with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Kyle Padell, who puts in a 5. And thank you very much, Kyle, as well for the support. He said, anyone ever heard of the black hole no time to crush you theory?
I think I have, actually. Yeah, I think I have heard about that, but I don't really know a lot about it, and I'd largely be ignorant to it. I really didn't explain it when I heard it, but I have heard it before. But still, thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to RID, who puts in the 5 and says, what if we form an alliance with China and Russia?
Oh, hell no. That would just be the worst.
No.
Like, we're teaming up with an economically significant country and then an economically insignificant country to depart from the largest economic alliance ever seen. Like, that's a terrible trade. Like, we're giving up tens of trillions of dollars in nominal GDP figures with our allies to get half of that or far less than that. It just doesn't make any sense at all to me. But beyond that,
and what are we going to do then? Be the ones invading Europe along with China and Russia one day? Because they have territorial ambitions that include taking all that over if they could, if they have the ability to do that. So if we're in an alliance with China and Russia, that means we're in there trying to take stuff over with them.
Yeah, I just don't like that one. But still, thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Fish Side, who puts in a $4 donation, 2 super chats. They said Tree Fitty, and it's true. They put in Tree Fitty on one of them, and thank you for that. And they said LSA, like, subscribe, super chat, even if it's 1.
And I got to thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And it's great to hear that you got some kind words to throw into the channel. And so with that, thank you so much once again. And we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Uncovered Cube, who puts in a 2. And thank you very much for the support as well, Uncovered Cube. They said, love y'all, and love the LSA, MRSA, and something Fest, Taiwan.
Hey, thank you so much for the support, and long live the Spring Army, and we will always stand in support of American and Western interests around the globe. And so with that, a huge thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one here goes to Marc-Andre Burnett, who puts in a $2 donation, along with Darren Quinn and Plazoth, and also Mark threw in another $2 super chat. And thank you very much, Mark, Darren, and Plazoth for that support and helping to keep us running. And actually, they did not leave comments, though, but thank you all to 3 of you for that support. And Enforcer, what say you?
And a big thank you to all 3 of y'all for the support as well, because if it wasn't for everyone who supported this channel, we wouldn't be able to keep this thing rolling. And so with that, huge thanks once again, and we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to RJ Lupin 2, who puts in a 2 and says, have you seen gravitational lensing in space? It's wild.
I have not. Let's take a look at that. Gravitational lensing. Gravitational lensing is a phenomenon that occurs when a massive celestial body, such as a galaxy cluster, causes a sufficient curvature of space-time for a path of light around it to be visibly bent, as if by a lens. Oh, wow, that's actually really cool. Here's an example of it.
That's pretty interesting.
Dude, that's wild. Look at that. Like, the light's
Why does it look
literally...
like the eye? That looks like the eyeball off of a Space Odyssey or something like that.
It kind of does. Yeah, it kind of does, doesn't it? But that's actually really cool. Like, the light actually has bent around it almost in a perfect circle. That's really cool. I've never seen or heard of this before, but what an interesting phenomenon. Apparently, the first mention of this was apparently in 1924 and 1936. And let's see. And apparently Einstein was the one who made unpublished calculations on it in 1912 and published an article on the subject in 1936. Very interesting. So let's see here. Do we have another example of this, like an actual picture of it in action? So this is let's see, black hole passing in front of a background galaxy, and this is a simulation of it, of course. So That's actually really cool. You know, like that's an incredibly interesting phenomenon. Of course, I don't know a damn thing about it, but that is just very interesting to look at. Let's see if there's another example of it. So this is apparently gravitational lensing right here. Like the light's actually bending around the galaxy clusters as it passes through. That's just, it's so, like, space is a very interesting kind of a thing. I hardly know anything about it, but that's probably why it's so interesting and fascinating, is because there's very little known about it. And you know, I wonder if I can pull up a picture of the naked sky. I think it's called. Let me see here. Oh, actually, that does not pull up the right thing. Let's see here. Sky without light pollution. Maybe that's a better way to put it. I heard it called before the naked sky, but that pulled up bad results. I'm glad I had that on another screen. But let's see here. So this is the night sky that Matthew and me get, which is number 8 through 9. But number 1 is usually what most people saw throughout most of history that didn't live in any kind of a major city. You were actually able to see the Milky Way itself and most of the stars that make up the Milky Way. So something like that. And it is really impressive. I've never seen it before, but I wish that one day I could get to an area that has no light pollution, so that way this kind of a thing was actually observable from, you know, wherever we were at. That would be really cool, but sadly, we've never been able to see that so far. But with that, I hope that does address that well, and thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one goes to Amix10 Speedy Bang Bang, who puts in a $10 donation, and thank you very much, Amix10, for that support. They said commercial flights between Australia and New Zealand are apparently being diverted in their course due to possible live fire exercises from the Chinese in the Tasman Sea, and ABC Australia is reporting it.
Oh, that's interesting. I'll have to look into that a little bit more, but thank you for tipping me off on that one, because I'll have to try and take a little bit of a gander at that. But still, thank you once again, and we are on to the next one.
And we are now moving on to our live chat questions. We are now fresh out of Super Chats, but thank you all once again for supporting the channel and helping to keep it running, because it's the Super Chats that help keep this thing rolling every single day, and we do appreciate it, seriously. But we are now moving on to our live chats. And up first, we have our Morse code decoders of the stream. Tonight we have Cliff Simonson, Mark Hodges, Earl Bernew, Kevin J, Paul Schultz, Dave Millsaps, Her Royal Fluffiness, Arabelle Garbo, Joni Dog, and Norm Pritchett. They said, the Morse for tonight says, from the LSA Signal Corps, it's a silly time to watch Russians get pushed back and then act strong. LMAO even, LLT LSA. What's the meaning of LMAO?
It means laugh my ass off. But that's the sound of money. And y'all got that down on the nail. That was the Morse code message of the night. I got to congratulate y'all for getting that correct time and time again. It's an absolutely amazing thing that y'all continue to get that correct. And it's incredibly cool, I have to say. But with that, I hope that does address that incredibly well, the best I can, I suppose. And also, Walter A. Lakota said, tell the Enforcer that we know more about our universe than we do our own oceans. And that's actually true. I have heard that before. I've heard that we've apparently only explored about 2% of the oceans, because most of it's just too deep for us to really plausibly explore at this point. And that's really wild to think that there's just actually so much around us that is still relatively unknown to us. And, you know, we just kind of live every day not knowing anything about it. And of course, the need to know more is an intrinsically human thing. So hopefully, eventually, we'll see that we continue to learn more and more about the world's oceans, because it would be nice to know a great deal about what actually covers about 3/4 of the surface of the planet, which is just nothing but water.
Yeah, we should. Like, honestly, if I could, like, if I had like a load of money that I could spend on something, I would say, let me develop like a submersible, like submarine, small little thing. That's just like a capsule. And let me hook up an Xbox controller to it. I'm going to try to take it down as deep as I can and see how far it'll go.
To the Titanic, and when it starts to creak and like break, I'm just going to tell everyone, it's fine, and then it'll implode on us. So like, it's like, that's a genius idea.
You said the Titanic?
Yeah, the Titanic, you know?
You mean the Titan submersible?
Well, they took it to the Titanic. That's where it blew up.
Oh, well, you said it was called the Titanic.
No, I said
it's not the Titanic.
No, I said go to the Titanic. I didn't say we call it the Titanic.
Oh,
I was actually about to add on before you said that. I was about to say, and then we'll call it the Titan to make sure to add to the irony of the whole thing. But beyond that, I would like to see that people would hopefully explore the world's oceans. Of course, Ocean Gate clearly isn't the one anymore. Unfortunately, they actually did some cool stuff before the submarine imploded. But considering that design was completely unfounded and all that. Beyond that, though, I would like to see that we hopefully would explore more of the world's oceans, because considering that it makes up 3/4 of the surface of the planet, it would be nice to know a lot more about it, considering that it's such an integral part of the surface of the Earth. But beyond that, I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the third to last question of the night.
And this one goes to, let's see here. This one goes to LSA Up Guy, who says, do we know how much Russian assets are currently frozen?
A lot. I believe it's somewhere around 500 billion, and around 270 or 280 billion of that's currently being held by Europe, and the other remainder of it's being held by the United States. So with that, I hope that does address that well. We are on to the second to last question of the night.
And this one goes to BB, who says, what do you think of the news that USA arms shipments have allegedly stopped arriving to Ukraine?
We actually didn't cover that story tonight because there was a lot of ambiguity around that. One Ukrainian minister, we actually covered that at the very beginning of the stream. One Ukrainian minister said that it stopped. Another one came out and said that guy is wrong and it has not stopped. So at this moment, we really don't know what's right or wrong. So we just didn't report on it. So I hope that kind of clears that up as to why we're not covering that, because there's a lot of ambiguity about what the actual answer to that is at this point. And so with that, we are on to the final question of the night. So who was the lucky last person through in the lucky last question of the night?
And that viewer is Dustin Mayo, who says, is the rumor of 2 Russian brigades refusing orders and mutinying, is it true or fake news?
I haven't heard that one recently. I have heard of Russian battalions mutinying, but brigade level mutinies I have not really heard of. So I'm generally doubting that one a little bit because I didn't get anything crossing my radar today on something like that at all, or yesterday for that matter. So with that, I hope that does address that somewhat well, at least the best I can with the information I have. And with that, we've reached the end of tonight's stream, and I got to thank each and every one of y'all so much once again for watching. We have had 61,000 people here on the stream tonight and a peak viewership of, I believe, 8.2 thousand people. We are entirely honored and appreciative to have had each and every single one of y'all here, and we hope y'all enjoyed tonight's stream. If you did, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, because we will be here tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to cover the next 24 hours of the news of the war in Ukraine. And so with that, good night, good luck, take care, stay safe, Slava Ukraini, and long live the Least Spring Army. The Least Spring Army will never die.
And a big thanks to all 61,000 plus people that joined us tonight on the stream, and all 3,200 likes that we got as well. Huge thanks for smacking the like button as well, because it helps get the news out there even further, and we appreciate that very much. And also, with that, folks, we'll see you all tomorrow night at 10 p.m. Eastern on the next night of War News streams. And who knows what tomorrow will hold in store, because it's crazy every day, and the news is getting wild. So we'll be here to report that tomorrow on the stream, and maybe a short war video if there is enough news to cover. Although I can't guarantee that, because honestly, there simply isn't enough news midday these days to make a short war video that would be worthwhile, and lengthwise, that is. It would be like maybe a minute or two long, and that's just not long enough to make a short war video. So maybe we can get back to that soon. Hopefully, we'll have to see. But definitely the stream tomorrow, so be here for that if you can. But with that, folks, thank you all for watching, and Slava Ukraine. Hear 'em, Slava. Get some rest, and good night.